Evening. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we're gathered here in the traditional lands of the Wasanic people. Welcome council, staff, and members of the public. Council, you have the agenda in front of you. May I have approval of the agenda?
Also move.
Second.
All in favor? That's carried, thank you. And we move down to 5A, smoking in downtown Sydney. We have a report from October 15th. Someone like to take the lead on that?
Sure. I'll move for the purposes of discussion here that council direct staff with the following options. Number 2, require that event organizers who are requesting to close Beacon Avenue to traffic make their event smoke and vape free, and that staff further investigate the steps to declare Sydney's downtown core smoke and vape free.
Do you have a seconder?
Second.
Discussion? Yep.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to staff for the report. I think I found the language in here compelling with respect to the option to install cigarette butt disposal containers as perhaps not being attractive in my mind in relation to the ongoing expense and or maintenance associated with that. And as a result, I removed that from the motion. Certainly flexible if council wants to revisit that. However, I didn't think it was of paramount importance. To me, I'm keenly interested in seeing Sydney's downtown core smoke and vape free, and so I'm supportive of this moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you. So, in principle, I support the idea. The thing I'm concerned about is our ability to enforce anything, and I'm also a bit concerned about the amount of signage that we might have to put up to reasonably educate people that we've got that kind of restriction in the downtown. Over the years, I've heard a lot of people express comments that we have too many signs in the downtown, and in fact some refer to them as steel trees. The idea of putting up a lot more signs to publicize this is not that appealing. But staff have actually mentioned in the report the challenge they foresee with being able to enforce this, because somebody won't be smoking or vaping for a prolonged period of time, and somebody's got to call in the report, and then bylaw has to get that report and then respond to it, and by the time they do, the individual may easily have moved off. So I'm foreseeing that there might be a fairly high level of effort, and we may not be very effective about it. I don't mind asking, getting staff to look at the option and tell us what they think they can do and what the challenges are. But I'm not that optimistic that that's going to be an option that would be practical to pursue. The other part of the motion about requiring event organizers to simply advertise that their event is smoke and vape free and putting the onus on them, I don't have any difficulty with. I'm quite happy to support moving that one forward.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan?
Thank you, Chair. I was similarly supportive of number 2. I thought that was fairly easy, and even if it's not terribly enforceable, at the very least it'll make some people decide not to, and it will reduce the problem. I had my concerns with part 3 was actually I started to wonder about all of the employees. Right now, employees are trying to, they probably have a few designated areas around that are the right distance away and things like that. I know kitchen staff, still big smokers. And I foresee having a downtown core that was smoke-free and having all of our kitchen staff having to move a block out of the downtown and hang out on the street corners in the residential area, and the conflicts that would then cause, and all of a sudden there'd be a whole piles of butts standing on the street corners there. So I'd prefer to having designated spots that were still within the downtown where they could actually have a butt disposal unit. and to have them be able to have their smoke break within their break. So for that reason, I would be more in favor of number 1, but I'm wondering, through the chair to staff, if you could kind of ballpark like an order of magnitude of what kind of level of effort and cost that would be.
Through chair to staff, or to council, sorry, it's hard to know until we actually get into it. I know the receptacles, like for actual purchase of them, we could get one for like $125. As far as maintenance of it, it's hard to say at this time.
And for staff time, a couple days to look through the downtown, measure some areas out, write up a report. So, okay.
Any further, yes, Councillor Keefe?
Thank you, Chair. So I also agree that I don't think it's worth the time, effort, and expense for the butt disposal containers. And I'm inclined to go along with just number 2 and not number 3. I would probably look for if the mover might be interested in deleting that, and that's the further investigating the steps to declare Sydney's downtown core smoke-free. I also agree that I don't know that the time, expense, and energy required to do that would get us that much further ahead. I think as a nuisance that butts on the street are, most people will follow the rules. And if you put up signs to say there's no smoking in this area, most will respect that. But there's always going to be people who are going to do that. So I don't know that having more signs and declaring that this is a smoke-free area is going to dissuade anybody else. So I'm more inclined to just go with the having events made smoke-free on Beacon Avenue and leave it at that.
Well, perhaps just before Councillor Rentoul, when we go to call the question, we'll just break it into 2 segments. And if that's okay with mover and seconder, we'll just do that.
Yeah, that's fine with me, Madam Chair.
Okay. Councillor Garnett?
Just a thought that just came to me, because I agree with what everybody's saying so far, but with regards to the cigarette built disposal containers, I think an aspect we haven't really touched on in this discussion and why it might be advisable to possibly go this way is that I've seen signs on occasion in town where another fire was prevented. So I'm wondering, that's an issue we haven't really discussed, is a potential for a fire with somebody throwing their butts in an area that's flammable. And would these containers mitigate that somewhat? And is that something we need to think about and looking forward?
Yes, please. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm supportive of option 2, but option 2 on its own deals with one aspect of the challenge we're facing, and that is a concern for smoking in certain areas that aren't covered by the current CRD smoking bylaw and events, and so that reasonably deals with that issue, but. It is a concern to the business community, the level of cigarette butts that are still on the sidewalks, and if we don't do anything else but except number 2, we're not addressing it in any way, and so really the option to deal with cigarette butts on the sidewalks is one of 2 options. One is the butt disposal units, or going to a downtown core smoke-free. I would be supportive, and I appreciate it's a separate resolution, but I would be supportive of investigating steps to declare Sydney's downtown core smoke-free. And as part of that process, I would ask staff to consult with some of the larger employers who have larger commercial premises, who might have concerns with staff who do have a place outside that doesn't interfere, with their business or violate the current CRD bylaw, because we wouldn't want employees to be either cheating or, you know, going off into the residential areas as might be suggested. So I realize we're dealing with them one at a time. If we found that it wasn't practical to declare Sydney a downtown core smoke-free, then I would actually look to butt disposal units. In the staff report, it indicates that Victoria, I don't know how recently, installed 50 of these units in their downtown. This is not a unique problem to our business district. The staff report also indicates that there were communities in the Lower Mainland that have done the same. And I think, you know, yes, there will be a cost to it, but I think some action is required to try and address this problem beyond just dealing with it at community events or the closure of Beacon Avenue.
I would just like to make a couple of comments as well. I think a big part of this came to our awareness with concerns with what the downtown core looked like, and it was about butts on the street. So I would actually be in favor of looking at putting in butt disposals. I'm certainly not in favor of more signs that just becomes, and people disregard them after a while. They just see them and don't even acknowledge them. But I think we're also setting out a message if we say that Sydney, downtown Sydney, is smoke-free. So I'd be inclined to support specific events being smoke-free events. I think if we're looking at being on the waterfront, we're looking at the fresh air, we're bringing out people, we're looking at kids being in the environment, I think it's a worthy goal to look to say we're going to have special events as being smoke-free. To declare all of Sydney downtown smoke-free at all time, I think that might be a secondary step. I think if we look at specific events to be smoke-free, I would be inclined to support that first. So do we have any further discussion? Yes, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of points, if I may, around the concern that was raised with respect to enforcement. I would argue that that challenge is already there. If you look at the CRD's clean air bylaw, making large portions of Sydney's downtown core smoke-free, the enforcement challenge already exists. This is about sending a message and providing the opportunity to our community to enjoy not only events, but shopping and their downtown experience smoke and vape free. And so I'm very comfortable with seeing Sydney take part of the lead here and move forward with this. Certainly wouldn't be the only community to have done so. But I will also note that I'd be happy, Madam Chair, to reintroduce the first recommendation as well at this time if the seconder agrees, so that council has an opportunity to vote on each of the three separately. I have no problem with seeing that revisited if you're comfortable with that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Madam Chair, if I might suggest, we do have a motion for the second, for number 2 on its own. Perhaps if we were to deal with that and then proceed with after that. So.
Okay, then I will call the question on number 2, which is require that event organizers who are requesting to close Beacon Avenue to traffic make their event smoke-free. All in favor?
And vape-free, sorry.
Sorry?
And vape-free.
And vape-free.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And vape-free. So all in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And yes, Councillor McNeil, or Mayor McNeil-Smith?
I would like to move recommendation 3 that staff further investigate the steps to declare Sydney's downtown core smoke-free.
Seconder?
As a point of order, I think we already have that on the table unless we were going to address it separately.
That was actually, yes, you had
I
actually changed that so that we were going to go through all 3.
Beg your pardon. So yeah, it's
All right, so
Not
then
voting
I
on
will
that.
call the question on point 1, which is bring forward a 2020 budget item. Sorry.
We're gonna vote on it.
So if we have number 3 on point of order, if we have number 3 on the floor, we'd have to vote on
Okay.
that before making another motion.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then we go to point 3, which is further investigate the steps to declare Sydney's downtown core smoke-free.
And vape-free.
So, all in favor?
No.
No, you want that for discussion? Okay, go.
So it's the motion's on the floor and discussion. So again, just to further speak to it, I think if we have additional information, sorry, I want to speak to, I want to concur with Councillor Rintoul with regards to enforcement and the CRD bylaw. CRD currently has an agreement with Island Health. It's their bylaw enforcement officers who deal with it. The challenge, who's ever bylaw enforcement is going to be that, that there's a pretty short window of the incident, and will the bylaw enforcement be there at the time that it's actually occurring. With regards to signage, currently CRD provides signs about this long and about this tall that have symbols, no vaping, no cannabis, no smoking, and they're required to be on every business at ground floor on each of their entrances. And so there's a lot of those in our downtown presently. I don't think it takes a lot of additional signage to indicate that we would be a smoke-free downtown, and I think we would be setting perhaps a precedent. I'm unaware of this in other business districts in the capital region, and I think we'd be setting a precedent, positive precedent for the region, community and the region.
Further discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
I guess my apprehension about going forward with this one is I don't know that there will be any significant impact that's different from now if we go through with this. So there's already a CRD bylaw that says smoking is limited from certain distance from buildings already. And now we're going to have smoke and vape free at events. So for the amount of time and the investigation that staff have to go through in the context of all the myriad of other things that are on our plate, I just don't see that there's value added.
Mayor McNeil-Smith?
Again, thank you. Again, just to speak to the time involved, currently with the signage that is on storefront windows and doorways for non-smoking, it's working. People do avoid, they're aware of it, and they do avoid it. The situation is we still have a challenge with cigarette butts on the streets or on the sidewalks. And are we just going to let that problem continue as it is when other municipalities have taken some action on it? We may not agree with butt disposal, but I think if you have signage up and it's in the media, we communicate it through our website, people are aware that our downtown is smoke-free, I think people are going to observe it. This is not going to be successful because we have bylaw enforcement officers standing on every corner enforcing it. It's going to be a success because of the communication of it.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe?
So I guess we already have signs in windows along Beacon Avenue that say no smoking, no vaping. But outside of those businesses, there's still cigarette butts. So I'm still not seeing where the value added is in having a declaration that Sydney's downtown is smoke and vape free, because we're hearing that it isn't working anyways. There already is those rules in place that you can't smoke in those areas, but people are doing it anyway. So I don't know that adding more signs or more is going to make, by declaring Sydney's downtown core smoke-free, is going to put us any further ahead. If people are going to smoke, they're going to smoke. If they're not going to obey the rules, they're not going to obey the rules. So I don't see how this third point in itself is going to stop the butts from landing on the ground.
Councillor Garnett?
I agree somewhat, but I also think we're just focusing on cigarette butts because that's been an issue brought forth by the business community. And I think when Councillor Rintoul added vape, that's also another important thing because the cigarette butt disposal containers, that doesn't impact that. And the vaping is also a problem, and it doesn't coalesce or mix with the butts on the ground and the mess part of the equation. So I think we need to do something that's a little more all-encompassing to make sure we're covering all our bases. And I think I'm leaning towards the smoke-free thing, and as with the vape as well added, that I think that's a great add on your part, so thank you.
I think there's an advantage to, I take Councillor Keefe's points, that we're still getting the smokers regardless of the signage, but I think if we were to declare the town or an area smoke-free, whether it's at specific times or in general, now to say downtown Sydney smoke-free, I think there is a message, an overlying message. Are we going to have people who are smoking? Absolutely. Are they going to throw them on the street? Absolutely. But I think it's a step in the right direction, so I'd be inclined to support it. So, seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question on number 3. Oh, sorry, Councillor Rintoul. Oh, all in favor? Opposed? That's one opposed.
Two.
Oh, 2 opposed, sorry. And that brings us then to number 1. Are we going to look at some discussion for number 1? Or are we going to call the question on that one?
I think somebody has to move it first.
It was.
No.
I thought you had included it.
I was willing to include it if the seconder was comfortable with that, so we could address it now on that basis.
So, yeah, my understanding it
Consider-
was on the floor.
Consider it moved then.
All right, so point number 1. No discussion? Yes, Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you. So I noted my concern for this was around, staff time and the implications of the ongoing maintenance. I think I'd like to see where number 3 plays out with respect to when we see this next before I would be supportive of installing cigarette butt disposal containers. I'm inclined to think that some of the uptick on this may have to do with the number of perhaps with construction projects in the downtown core, we may see an increase in transient traffic and trades who aren't as familiar with some of the locations where it's acceptable to leave their cigarette butts versus residents who are shopping in the town core. So I guess, as I say, I'd like to see number 3 play out and hear back from staff before I would support number 1. Certainly, I'll try to be open-minded if it comes back to council. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Duncan?
I don't believe that the ongoing cost implications of number 3 would be less than number 1. I mean, the signs probably don't need a lot of maintenance and probably, but we're going to have to be constantly talking about it. And they're still going to have to be cleaning the sidewalks at the same frequency because I think the butts are still going to be there with the same frequency. So I find it a little odd that we were worried about the cost implications of number 1, which would probably do more to actually address the issue of the butts being on the sidewalk and reduce the amount of cleaning on the street that needed to be done. But number 3 was perceived as having less cost, and certainly number 3 would probably have more staff time cost up front too. I think the costs there are going to be farther front loaded in terms of the investigation of it. As the mayor mentioned, to really roll that out, you're going to have to talk to the businesses and about what their options are for employees and how they think that's going to go over with them. So I think in terms of staff time, number 3 might actually end up being more than if we just done number 1. But my main concern is that this is just one of those ones where we're kind of dealing with people as we wish they were rather than people as they are, and that what is it? Somebody said the gap between expectation and reality is disappointment, and so I kind of think that number 1 would be a more realistically achievable goal, especially knowing the likely demographics of the people who will be smoking downtown are going to be those construction workers and service industry workers, and the people who are less likely to be reading the news and our website and everything and know that our town is downtown smoke free, and to think that that's a good idea in the first place. So I'd still be more supportive of number 1.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you, Chair. I concurred with Councillor Rintoul on this one in terms of I'm more inclined to see how things go with the other 2 options before we investigate further interventions. And yes, it's been mentioned that this has been done in other towns and cities, but there's a cost to it. It sounds like in Victoria, as per the staff report, that they had a volunteer or an organization that took care of this, and it seemed to go fine until, I'm not sure what happened there, but the town had to eventually take that over and look after maintenance and disposal of these things. And I just always go back again to, there's a lot on our plate, you know, at our strategic planning session, there's a lot of things that we want staff to spend time on and that we want to do. And so in the scheme of all those other things, I would rather see us go with these two other options and just leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you. So I think Councillor Duncan's comments are quite reasonable, and we may in fact wind up at that particular option in the end. Making the downtown core smoke-free, we're obviously going to have to do a lot in the way of making people aware that we've done that. You know, ads in the paper and all that kind of stuff. And fundamentally, we're going to be relying primarily on voluntary compliance. It may work, may not work. The only thing I would really throw out is if we look at option 2 and 3 and then decide, maybe this isn't quite good enough, I would hope that we don't miss the timing of our budget deliberations and then have to put it off a whole year. To simply have the cost available when we go into the budget process, and if it turns out that options 2 and 3 are great and we think we don't need to have that information for budget, we can always rescind that. But I think it really probably does make sense for us to know what the option costs and be thinking about it at budget time rather than by default put it off to the year after. Because if it's a problem, I don't see why we'd want to put it off for a year.
Thank you. I think, Councillor Wainwright, that makes a lot of sense for me, and I like the points you brought up. Is there any further discussion? Then I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That's 3 opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. That brings us to 7A. Under Development and Planning, we have Development Permit Application Number EP 100786 at 10129 5th Street to construct a 3-story, 71-unit multifamily residential development. Presentation by Nigan? Thank you. District Group and Renata Solivar, MCM Partnership Architects. Welcome.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mayor McNeil-Smith.
I would like to declare a conflict and recuse myself. I have a family relationship with a member of the proponents team. Thank you.
Thank you. Just wait a moment until the mayor leaves the room. Thank you. Go ahead.
Good evening. I guess I'd say your worship. I guess he had to excuse himself, members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you tonight and to meet all of you. As mentioned, I'm Mike Nygren. I'm the president of District Group. And I'm just going to spend a couple seconds to kind of introduce the project and District. I'm going to pass it on to Renate from MCM Architects, who'll go into some details of our proposal. But just to give you a sense of who we are. So District Group, we are primarily builders, developers, and long-term owners of rental apartment buildings. And we do this across British Columbia. We have about 3,500 units in various stages of ownership and development and construction. Myself, I was actually born and raised in Port Alberni and have strong family connections there, as does my business partner. So our focus actually is very largely on Vancouver Island. We have projects actually in Port Alberni, as north as Comox, Parksville, a few in Nanaimo, and then down the southern part of Vancouver Island, we're in Colwood, a few in the city of Victoria, and then here in Sydney. And we have a number of projects as well throughout BC, Abbotsford, Surrey, and Kelowna. With respect to Roberts Manor, which we're talking here, so we acquired this project or this site in the fall of 2018. So we own the existing Roberts Manor apartment building, which was built in 1979 and is 60 units. And then the proposal we're talking about today is on land that was once part of the Roberts Manor property that was subdivided before we purchased it. So we purchased both this, call it vacant parcel of development land, as well as the existing Roberts Manor building. So our proposal, so since then, I guess last 14 months or so, we've been working both with MCM and your staff to craft the proposal that you see today. I guess just briefly, as far as some statistics, so the site is just over 3/4 of an acre. The building area is about 60,000 square feet. It's a 3-story building comprised of 71 units. There's 71 market rental apartment units that we will build and own long-term with our ownership group. They consist of a range of all unit types, from studio apartments all the way up to the larger 3-bedroom units that to be compliant with your bylaws. Our proposal, I think, meets or exceeds basically all of your zoning and OCP criteria. We don't require any variances with this proposal. That was part of spending a considerable amount of time with both our architects and staff to craft something that addressed bylaw and policy-related guidance. It addressed and balanced providing as many rental apartments as we could, but also making sure that the project was designed to be right-sized for the site and for the context of the neighborhood. We're very proud of where we've come and gone in the last 14 months. And we're very appreciative of the strong relationship we have with staff and working through that with us. I'm going to pass it on to Renante now, and he'll kind of walk you through a bunch more of the specifics. And obviously, I'm not sure about order, but happy to answer questions once we're through it.
Okay, I'm putting my timer on. Good evening. My name is Renante Solivar. I'm an architect and a partner at MCMP. And thank you tonight for giving us this opportunity to present this application. We're super excited about it, and we just wanted to go through how we complied with the regulation. So working with staff, as Mike mentioned, we went through the OCP, the bylaws, and from that, we, using their guidance, developed the form and character and also informed our landscaping. So in terms of the site, it's going to go back one more. In terms of the site, we have, it's a panhandled site. Our main elevation is actually off of 5th Street. And so the whole idea that, that underground parking is actually from Malibu Avenue, just so everyone has an idea of it. So one of the first things that we did was we took some time to actually understand the site, took a lot of photographs, visited it. The big thing that we were wanting to respond to was that the site itself has actually got a gradient of about 9 feet. So from 5th Street, it actually slopes up. So we wanted to take advantage of that slope when we were actually looking to bury the underground parking. Along with looking at the site, we wanted to understand the character, the scale, the existing buildings around us, and then the several trees that we're actually going to be retaining. So in terms of where we started from, we started with the OCP, and we kept the visions in the back of our minds as we were doing the planning and working with staff on the principles of what Sydney wanted to envision on this development. So when we looked at the site and we started to think about, okay, after we went through the planning, what are some of the key elements of actually trying to break down the scale of this apartment building? And so we started to look, this is our inspiration board, and working with staff, we started to develop a color palette that wasn't completely all gray, but more, it had some punch to it to give life and identity to the building that you'll see in the following images. These forms kind of, they were inspiring to us because we wanted them simple. We took cues from the windows to potentially give them some detailing, but not to have to be overly articulate in terms of the form itself and to fit in. And so when we started to look at the elevations, the two dominant ones are the ones on 5th Street, the west elevations, and then the south and the north, so the long sides adjacent to the other properties. And so how we started to apply some of the inspiration was trying to treat each of them as individual units. So right now what you see is our elevation studies of how we might apply some of the color that we started to select, and also how to deal with the sides of the elevations, because you know, they're quite continuous in nature. So then, go further applying some of that logic, we went and took a look at the neighborhood and then saw how do we kind of fit in terms of bringing it into context. And so what we're trying to demonstrate here in the lower part of the elevation is where we took some of the cues for the coloring. Some of the detailing that we're proposing now on the elevations are the board and batten, some vertical and horizontal siding. And so this is our composite, our renderings kind of the street of 5th Street right now as you see it. So here's the large tree that we're retaining, and what's actually more prominent here is that this elevation is actually set back. So you can kind of see from the street view, you actually don't perceive the other two until you come around the corner. And so one of the focuses that we wanted to show was trying to inset the building itself to make it more pedestrian friendly. So the ground floor actually has ground-oriented units that actually have access right off of the street. So the next series of slides is just showing how we took the OCP and applied it to the massing. So it's just a conceptual view of what it looks like from the top. So one of the things that we wanted to do was actually push this building down as far as we can to make it comply, but also to still be able to have livable units. So along 5th Street, we layered in what we were going to show as keeping the trees. And so the trees themselves actually further created these little opportunities to set back the buildings, to give it a little bit more articulation. And then with the coloring, you can see it now as this diagram, how we tried to use the coloring to kind of break up the north and the south sides of the elevations. And then the massing. One of the things that we saw from our inspiration is to try to take that very simple house form on an apartment complex. But really, what you see on the street is not necessarily the rest of the building, but it's only those facades. And in terms of the roof, we chose a gabled roof. You know, we really like that very traditional kind of housing form. And in terms of the landscaping, here you can see the 3 trees that we're proposing to retain. The landscaping in general is quite modest. Most of the trees are actually for privacy on the adjacent buildings. And then we have a little bit of a front lawn. So in terms of tree replacement, we're just over 2 to 1 in terms of replacing the trees are there. So we're giving back more than what we took away. Just going back now into the bylaw and how we've complied. So we're in the RN6 zone. And then this is the tables that you see more illustrated on our zoning comparison. So in terms of building heights, 12 meters is permitted. We're just below that at 11.94. 3 stories, so we got 3 stories. And then the basement and parking. This is a critical key for us because on our first iterations with the city, we had our access off of 5th and it actually was a lot higher. And so we worked with staff to work to actually bring it down, and now you don't see the access at all off of 5th. And in the setbacks, we comply. So 4.5 in the front, 3 in the sides, 5.5 in the back. FAR, we're under. The permitted is 1.75. We're at 1.58. Lot coverage, 65%, so we're at 62. And then the last 2 slides are about the units. So we've hit our targets for the required 8 large units. So they're all in either the 1st or 2nd floors. And then the adaptable units. 20% was required, so we're at 22. I think that's 16 somewhere in there. That's us.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I have a few comments and then some questions hopefully you can answer. I have to commend you on something we desperately need in this community, which is rental built housing. I spent a lot of time looking at the site the other day, and I'm quite familiar with it anyways. I was the delivery agent for that site for many years. I appreciate the fact that you've made it not look like a rental building. I have to say that I like the character and form that it takes, and it doesn't strike me as your traditional 70s, 80s kind of rental building. It looks like home, for lack of a better way of putting it. Also appreciate the fact that you've taken what was basically a huge parking lot and a tennis court. So your footprint is not taking up a lot of green space. I mean, if it was green space, but you're putting a building on what essentially was asphalt. So for that, I appreciate that greatly. Sad to see some of those mature trees go, but I appreciate the effort you're making to actually plant and go beyond what you're supposed to do. That's a great step. The fact that you were willing to work with staff for such a lengthy period of time to avoid variances is impressive, because I've sat in these chambers a long time and not seen that extent of effort put in on many developments. So that to me is very impressive. The questions I have regarding, I have a few. One centering around parking. I'm assuming you've left enough accommodation for rental parking for the Roberts Manor in all the parking that's been shifted around?
Yes, yeah. I think when the land was subdivided, they reoriented some parking in the area to make sure that on a standalone basis complied.
Right.
So the new site now with this proposal complies on its own as well.
Right.
So even accessing through that site, we haven't had to reconfigure any of the existing Roberts Manor parking to make that happen. So they both do stand legally on their own with respect to that.
So essentially, we're going to have 131 units in a fairly tight area. Was there any allowances for any guest parking at all? Because I know there used to be guest parking in one little part there, sort of where you at the top.
We meet the parking bylaw.
Yeah, no, I get
So
that.
those go one
I'm just
per
in
unit
terms
and-
of having that many residents.
Yeah.
They're bound to have guests. There's going to be. I know there's some seniors live in Roberts Manor, home cleaning, that kind of thing. People
So
coming
yeah,
for care.
So I think the requirement is one per suite. We don't, like in the existing Roberts Manor building, we don't actually, there isn't one per suite there that's actually utilized. So there's inherently extra parking for visitors or otherwise.
Great. Okay. And one accessible spot. Is there a possibility to have more than one accessible? Then, given that you have 16 adaptable units.
Potentially. I mean, the parkade was a very fluid design in it. I think there's probably an opportunity to look and see where we fit spaces in that could be wider or located separately. So I mean, we'd be happy to take that away.
Okay. What else was there? Sorry, this thing just popped in my mind. With regards to environmental standards, I'm assuming you're going to go to what's the code. Is there anything in your plans to go beyond what's in the building code presently?
I mean, I should probably let Renate speak to this, as far as some technical detail. But I mean, doing lots of these things in lots of different places, we're subject to different requirements that different municipalities have. We tend to kind of approach things in a very similar way. So, we do put bigger windows in than most rental apartment buildings. We find that it just makes the space a lot nicer. It's much more condo quality than, say, rental apartment quality. But then on the flip side of that is that hurts energy efficiency. Right. So we make sure that the spec of the windows accommodates that. Do you want to speak a bit more to some of those?
Just to add to that, I mean, we haven't gone, what we are going to be doing is the right things, and they're really ingrained in what we do. So we're going to have low VOC materials, durable materials. We're going to go through our pretty much our mechanical system, and kind of go through our potable water system, look at the stormwater retention. So these are the things that we've already done just inherently. We haven't talked about any certification at this point. Right. But we are going to be, I mean, right now the building code's gotten pretty stringent. So our building performance on our wall assemblies are going to just that much be a lot better than it was 10 years ago. Our glazing is going to be up to current codes, and it's going to be a lot tighter than what it used to be. We're going to have all of our outlet ready for electric vehicles. So we're going to be doing a lot of things that are all industry standards now.
Just on that note too, we do pre-conduit and pre-wire for solar. Okay. So we haven't implemented solar in any of our projects yet. Again, another Port Alberni colleague of my business partners and I actually runs a fairly sizable solar installation business based here in the island, doing work across BC. We're probably getting close to where we might do a building, just given cost efficiency others, where we'll run the common area lighting, for example, off of solar. But at least being ready for it with the roof structure and with the conduits, we can add that in at any time. And those are things we're mindful of, because it is down to bottom line. It does allow affordability to pass on with operating costs and things like that. So, but we've at least future-proofed for things like that.
Just a couple more, if I may,
Yep.
Madam Chair. The side that of the building that will go along the back of the Malaview residence, and then the house at I believe it's 10,137 Fifth, which is to the left there. Is there enough built in as far as privacy? I was concerned about decks and people looking into backyards, and if that's going to be an issue for the people that presently live there. Is it far enough back that you don't think it'll be an issue?
So one down here?
So if you're running along where you come in off of Malaview for your parking, and then there's probably 3 or 4 houses plus I think a 5-unit townhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we've got sufficient planting.
Okay.
We were quite sensitive about that, and when we took a look, I mean, there's their fence, but we've actually purposely made a lot of the intent
Perfect.
with the planting to be
Okay.
screened. Yeah.
That's great. You said market, so I love the breakdown of the different units in here. Do you know kind of a ballpark figure what the rents are going for those type of units today? I'm just thinking in terms of our people in our community that are at the lower end of the income spectrum.
So what I can tell you is this is the nice thing about building next to an apartment building you own. You kind of know what you're getting for rent there. Rents range in that building for studios around $1,200 a month. One bedroom's at $1,500, one in den's $1,800, twos are into the 2000s, and there's a couple large units in there that I think are around the mid 2000s.
Okay.
And so I mean that would be a proxy for what rents would be
Right.
here.
Okay.
Just on that note too, we are actually working with BC Housing on this project. So it's through their Housing Hub program, which is their middle income affordable housing
Right.
program. So they effectively provide us a financing package. In exchange for that, we provide a minimum of 10-year covenant that all tenants have to meet an income test that they define.
All right. And
it be defined as quote unquote middle income. I can't tell you what that income level is yet. We're still going through the underwriting process, but it will have that inherent affordability criteria attached to it.
And I guess one last question. With regards to the 10-year, I guess my only concern is that 10 years comes and goes pretty quick. So, and I don't think we're going to have a lack of need for rental housing in 10 years. So I'm not sure if this is a question I go through to staff, because you're going with a different organization to help you out on this. If there's any way at all to make that longer. I know you can't maybe do in perpetuity, but we're looking at a bylaw change here, rental exemptions for possibly 20 years. Something we're going to be discussing. I mean, overall, I love the project and I'm enthused about having all this extra stuff availability for people who are needing rental accommodation in our community. But I just wouldn't want to see it disappear too fast. So that's kind of like where I'm just like, can it be longer?
Yeah. So your point is well taken on that. I think the one thing in our view is we're not looking to stratify the units in the building. So I think if 10 years comes along and and if all of a sudden rental wasn't in demand, probably not going to be the case, but say it was, and say that condos were in demand, they made mortgage rules so easy that everybody just wanted to own and wanted to rent anymore. The ability to stratify building even a year after you've built it, given code and the complexities and the things that the city actually has to regulate and agree to if there's exceptions or otherwise, becomes extremely complicated. The building code's changing so quick. We almost see it impossible to be able to convert that in 10 years economically. Again, we are long-term owners of rental product. Our financial partners are long-term owners of rental product. They probably combined own over 10,000 units across BC and other provinces. So I think the best way for me to answer that is just because it's a 10-year covenant. I mean, it's going to be an apartment building.
Okay. Thank you for your patience and your answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to get a bit of clarification on the remarks you just made about income test and the minimum 10-year requirement. you hadn't actually said anywhere in the package that this is an affordable housing or affordable rental type of project. And I guess it sounded like from the way you answered that there will be some limit on the rent, and that people who, households that make too much income won't be eligible. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna have to say, this is the first time I've heard a proponent come forward with an affordable housing project without making a big deal about that in their pitch. And you didn't ask for any variances or rezoning or anything. This is really novel, so thank you.
Our pleasure. Yeah, maybe if I can offer just one comment on that working with BC Housing on that program is not something that you walk into their office and it happens overnight. And I mean, if we were to go to a bank or we were going to BC Housing to look for a financing package, it's substantially faster to go through the private sector to get financing to do these things. BC Housing obviously adds some goodies in how they approach the financing. It is a substantially lengthy, complicated underwriting process on their part. And we were going to build this one way or the other. And I think that the fact that we've been able to get there since we started working on this 14 months ago is sort of, I mean, it's a nice adder to it, I guess. So just to give some clarification to that it's something that it takes so long to have committed to that at the beginning. We would have been at this even that much longer.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I would just like to echo Councillor Garnett's comments about the accessible parking, if at all there are other places, because I know that's one barrier people talk about all the time, that now we've got, great, I have a place I can live, but I can't leave my apartment now. So if at all possible. And I noted that you've got the electric conduit going into the parking lot, and I'm just wondering if you're installing charging capability at the resident and visitor bike stalls as well. I ask everyone this, and because I'm over 50% of the bikes that are being sold in Sydney are e-bikes now, and with our demographics, it's just going to be important for their residents to have, particularly if they don't end up having cars.
Yes, I think, I mean, the nice thing about electric bike charging versus car charging, and again, car charging is also evolving to become easier to retrofit than it was previously, just given how cars accept being plugged in, I guess, for lack of a better word. They're a bit easier to retrofit in if you need to, but I think that's, we're always going to find ways to make sure that we're accommodating tenants. I mean, property management and moving through these things once they become a building where people live in, and you know, those it's a good business plan for us to accommodate those needs. So it's good to know that that's not something we're aware of, but I know that we are doing that in some of our other projects. So I think that's something that we can deal with for sure.
Great. And I saw you have green roof on there, and I'm just wondering what is planted on the green roof. There's a little.
I'm going to let Renante answer that one.
Where'd it go?
I think that's moss.
So.
I think it's in the center part of the
Yeah. Oh,
in here.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, there is a courtyard.
Okay.
There's a courtyard. And
So-
it's actually on top. There's actually a deck.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I don't have my drawings set.
So just to explain that center courtyard, it is a combination of the indoor amenity area that's common for all residents and some outdoor patio space that does terrace up through that indoor space, the geometry of which, again, I'll try to be you for a second here, deals with how sunlight is to get in there so that the units that are inside there, which are a limited number, have good quality outdoor space and light, but they also have privacy. But then there's also outdoor amenity area that's inside of there that can attach to the indoor amenity. So if you're having a function or a party or something, that there is that indoor-outdoor. We obviously will work with the interface of where we're saving the trees, so that's nice outdoor natural amenity area as well. But so there's part of that that'll have a green roof treatment of some kind, but it's a fairly small area. What we're, I don't know, sedums or?
That's pretty good.
I'm for hire.
So it is a moss, so I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's open to the sky, and so it'll be it'll be part of for the tenants.
Yeah, and that's what I was wondering. So if it was just an outdoor patio area that had, planters, or if it was an actual green roof treatment like that cool one they've got down in Vancouver at the conference center or whatever. So, yeah. And about this might be just an item of curiosity. You didn't, you had an engineer report check about the flood construction level. Your underground parking was fine.
Yeah, we meet that, yeah.
You're 3.3 meters above sea level. What is the FCL level here, just out of curiosity?
5.5, I believe.
Okay.
And it relates to the parquet ramp entrance.
Okay.
So I mean, that was an item that we went back and forth with staff on a couple times as far as getting the geometry and the location of that correct. I believe it's 5.5 meters, and that's so the bottom of the parquet can be below that. Is the entrance of the parquet higher than that to effectively create a pathway for the water to get in if there was a flood of that nature. But we do comply, and we do have an engineer's report that has been accepted and reviewed for that.
Yeah, I was just wondering how much wiggle room you had based on that.
Is that in the, do we know the?
I didn't bring the drawings in with me.
Do you have the drawings there? Can we follow up with that answer?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I had one that Scott didn't get to. You've started talking about this a little bit after Scott's questions, because I know we ask for better energy efficiency, but then we also ask for articulation and all of these aesthetic standards, and I know they conflict a lot of the time. But you do have buildings in other municipalities where they've started implementing the STEP code, and it sounds like you're aware of them and probably like to meet whatever standards you meet in your other buildings. Do you know what it would be like? Is there an equivalence that you're kind of looking for?
Well, right now, just to give a reference, so at the end of this year, STEP Code 2 was going to be the new implemented standard. And so at the moment, that's what we're striving for, and we'll hit it. A lot of the energy code requirements are pretty much going to, again, our building wall assemblies are going to get that much more insulated. The specifications that we have for the glazing aren't going to be the same as we did like 5 years ago, so they are increasing. As we talk about articulation, we're very conscious of that. So some of the overhangs that we are showing right now really are intended to keep the water from shedding and going off the water. So we haven't been very extravagant with a lot of the forms. And so we tried to do the opposite of trying to make it the mass broken down through color at the moment. So we didn't want to have to do a lot of in and out, which is really bad for detail in the building. Water can get in, so we were quite sensitive about how we chose to articulate it, and we kept most of that in the front where it's more publicly. You can see the visibility, the overhangs on 5th Street.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. And we now go to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Thank you for so many things. Rental units, adaptable units, all the parking. Yeah, excellent. I'm excited about this. So some questions I'm wondering I have. So in regards to the adaptable units, are the other common areas also accessible, like the amenity room? Is that also?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
it will be.
Okay, and I'll just echo the comments of my colleagues on the parking. So I don't know if you're aware that provincial government is just launched consultations in terms of new accessibility legislation. And so what we're hearing loudly from people in that community is, as Councillor Duncan said, it's fine to have a place to, need a place to live, but also a place to park. So it would be nice if we could see, at least 3, I'm thinking, parking spaces for that, if possible. Also, in regards to, I went to a couple workshops with Councillor Duncan, I think was there too, Landlord BC, and they talked about the difference between regular building, condo buildings and purpose-built rental buildings. So I'm wondering if you can comment if there's any elements of this that are unique because it is purpose-built for rental? Is there anything that you're doing different?
From a condominium?
Yeah, so I mean, they talked about, you know, having to have more durable materials because there's more people coming and going, provisions for sometimes freight elevators.
Well,
No?
the standard,
I
yeah,
can-
no,
I can-
I mean, if we're talking about the standards of what we're constructing to, I mean, we are gonna be building to higher standard than what I think a lot of people have gotten used to apartment rentals. And so, again, going back to the sustainability, you know, low VOC, we will be selecting durable materials. The demising walls between the two will likely be governed by, it escapes me right now. Besides the STC rating between them, there's going to be another level of sound transmission and also odors. So those are they're already built into the bylaws that we have to adhere to.
I think as a general comment, we're building most, if not all, of our apartment buildings kind of everywhere to effectively a condo quality spec. So that we do have stone countertops. We found a way to procure them inexpensively enough, and they're more durable. Believe it or not, we actually import our cabinetry from Italy, where we get it substantially cheaper than you could buy it from IKEA, because we buy in volume. And what we find there is that, you know, renters, and this is not, it's just a matter of owning a lot of these things and see what happens. They're a little bit harder on stuff than people that own, so you need to build things with durability. So that might sound extravagant, but it's actually a good business plan because we find it lasts longer. You can open up drawers and put 80 pounds on them, they don't break. We use resilient vinyl plank flooring in all the units. They have acoustic undermat under that. That's over top of the 1.5 inch of concrete that you would still do in a wood frame condo building for sound transmission. The studs are offset in between the walls with sound proofing between them and double layers of drywall, things like that, which is all fairly standard stuff. You know, we do things like we've been able to find solid slab materials to put for backsplashes. So again, they look really nice, but they aren't tile, where you have grout issues or tiles breaking or things like that. They're easier to clean, they last a lot longer. We run that vinyl flooring into the bathrooms. Again, tile is just a hard thing in bathrooms. We don't do tubs with tile surrounds because the buildings settle, they tend to leak. We have a tough time getting in there sometimes to be able to waterproof those, so we use solid inserts, and then we use a decorative tile surround. So again, it's getting a high level of design, but being very, very conscious of the materials and products we're putting in there, but to really, at the end of the day, again, through the size of the windows and through the layout of the space, make this feel very much like a condo unit versus what you'd see from sort of a 70s or 80s rental stock apartment building.
Good. And just one more thing in regards to them being rental units, and you talked about possibly putting a covenant on the property so that they would be maintained. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so it's a 10-year covenant, and there's two reasons that happens.
Yep.
Number one is when we build for ourselves as rental buildings, we avoid paying for home warranty just because we're not passing that on to an individual buyer for the 2, 5, 10 year, which is, call it a $1,700 or $2,000 unit cost. So we effectively self-warranty, but again, that's something that in order to get that exemption through the Housing Protection Office, you have to commit to effectively the end of that warranty period of it being rental only. And then in addition, with BC Housing's financing package, there's the 10-year income test and rental only. So those two things effectively go together for 10 years. And then back to my previous comment, we're building this to own this a very long time. We're investing in the community, and I think it's nice to be able to come here and say, not only we're spending some time to try to build something good, but we're going to be good neighbors, and we're going to be investing in the community, and we're doing it for long term. And it's almost impossible to stratify it at the end of 10 years anyway.
I guess what was percolating in my head might there be an opportunity for the town to, with the new powers we have for zoning, to zone that specifically just for rental units in the future? But maybe that's a question for staff.
Yes. Mr.
Just
Helmut.
for point of clarification, just to speak to the proponent's indication of not stratifying it. So if it's not stratified, it's built, they receive their building permit, their occupancy permit, they move in. So the approving authority in terms of the stratification after the fact is actually mayor and council. So there's a big hammer that council has with respect to future stratification.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Humboldt. Thank you, Councillor Keefe. And Councillor Rentoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll be brief. I just wanted to take the opportunity to express my appreciation, Michael and Renate, for your presentation and for bringing the opportunity to Sydney. Like my colleagues here in council, I think it's an excellent opportunity to see some rental housing. I completely understand the business model you've spoken to and you've committed to around the rental aspect. You already do that. You do it in Sydney already, and so I thank you for continuing providing opportunities to this community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And I would just like to echo what my colleagues at the table have said. I'm very proud to see this coming into our town. I also, just looking at that picture right there, that view, the fact that you have set it back, you've got some green space. One of the things that people are so often complaining about the new construction is because it's zero lot line and because of cost of construction, there's little articulation, there's little excitement in the building, and if you don't have anything to soften it, anything organic, then you've added some architectural detail, which I find is really quite interesting, and you've got the green space. So I would like to congratulate you on that one, and certainly look forward to seeing this move forward. Council, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll move the recommendation that development permit application number DP 100786 at 10129 5th Street be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment.
Second.
Second, further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you very much. That takes us, Andrew's going to get our mayor back. That takes us to 7B, which is the new cannabis retail store license referral, 2410 Beacon Avenue. Presentation by Cindy Pendergast, business owner. Please come forward. And maybe just wait until the mayor comes back in and takes his place. Thank you. Welcome back.
You guys ready?
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Brad Stocks. This is my wife and business partner, Cindy Pendergast. Oh, sure. Thank you. There we go. Got it. I'll start again. There you go. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Brad Stiles. This is my wife and business partner, Cindy Pendergast. And I just wanted to thank you for reviewing our application for an LCRB referral this evening. It's been quite the process, and we really do appreciate all the hard work and help from council. Just as a quick introduction, we're a local family business. We are self-financed, and as there is no financing available for cannabis retail, and we're also new to the cannabis industry. And I'll pass it on to you, Cindy.
Thank you very much. Good evening. As we know, there was a well-advertised public hearing and input from the SBIA and the Chamber in August to allow for a zoning amendment allowing for cannabis retail on Beacon Avenue, and that was adopted by council then. Since then, we have received many positive comments and questions about the store, the licensing program itself, and of course when we might open. We're excited to bring this venture to Sydney if we're permitted to do so, and we think it'll be a fruitful economic driver on Beacon Avenue. We anticipate making a very positive contribution to Sydney, and we think we're good business neighbors. We'd like to keep shoppers in Sydney rather than going to Victoria or Saanich. We appreciate that the LCRB requirement for an opaque front window for every licensed retailer in British Columbia, without exception, is not anyone's preferred choice. Council reviewed this as part of the discussion, taking into account public input in August, prior to approving the zoning amendment. In the ensuing 2 months, in good faith, we have invested time, energy, and money, although nothing like their proposal in preparation for commencing business here in Sydney. And we respectfully ask council to support our application referral this evening, and I'll turn it back to Brad.
Thanks, Cindy. In closing, we wish to thank you again for your consideration as we, along with the rest of BC and Canada, move into the second year of legal cannabis and this exciting new chapter for all of us and where it's going to lead. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open up to council if there are any questions of the proponents. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Council, you've got recommendation here with this report. Where would you like to go with this? Councillor Rentoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If it meets with the approval of my colleagues, I'd like to suggest that we break it up for consideration, perhaps under the three aspects as laid out in the staff report. And I would be prepared to move the first element of the recommendations, that staff be directed to respond to the Liquor and Cannabis Licensing Branch regarding the Happy Buddha Cannabis application at 2410 Beacon Avenue with a copy of the staff report dated October 15th, 2019, related to the Happy Buddha Cannabis application, and the following decision. One, whereas it is the Council of the Town of Sydney's opinion that a proposed cannabis retail store shall meet to a high degree the standards and requirements established by the Town of Sydney Liquor and Cannabis Licensing Policy DV-015. Two, and whereas policy DV-015 highlights the Town of Sydney's broader expectation that cannabis retail store locations will support the Town of Sydney's goals and policy objectives of creating and maintaining a pedestrian-friendly retail experience on Beacon Avenue, that it includes a variety of interesting and accessible window displays visible to the public. Three, and whereas the proposed Happy Buddha Cannabis retail store's proposed storefront design does not provide a retail display or a level of visual interest that would address this expectation. And four, therefore, based on the application not meeting the requirements of policy DV-015, the Council of the Town of Sydney resolves that the application be denied.
We have a seconder? Seconded. Discussion. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the proponents mentioned during their presentation, we had a pretty lengthy discussion on this particular issue when we were considering the zoning amendment. And it was advertised, and we had a public hearing, and we had a lot of input. And it was a 4-3 decision, but in the end, we decided to allow it on Beacon. And we knew about the interactive storefront issue. It was something we specifically discussed. And I'd say the logical consequence of that decision is to expect that there might be a license application, and we've got one. And I appreciate the the staff report, and we can revisit exactly the same discussion we had not really all that long ago. I don't see that as a particularly productive discussion unless one of the 4 people who voted in favor of that rezoning amendment wants to change their mind. I appreciate the 3 that voted opposed to it are probably still going to be opposed to it, but I would ask them not to make this a really lengthy discussion, and I would look to the 4 that voted in favor of the amendment to see if any of them have changed their mind. And in fact, the typical sort of protocol is if you're on the losing side of a vote, you don't bring back a motion to the opposite effect for a period of 6 months. So in fact, and I appreciate the Local Government Act lets you do that, but that's exactly what this motion is.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. Councillor Duncan.
So I was one of the 4 who voted for, and we had a very lengthy discussion. And one of my colleagues, I can feel them going, I told you so inside, because what I had tried to make clear in my discussions of it is that while we talked about having them on Beacon, it was because we already have many addresses on Beacon that would meet this proposed new 15-meter setback. None of them, I don't know how many of them are vacant right now, but I thought it didn't mean that any place on Beacon would be a good place, but rather that by ruling out all of the ones on Beacon, we would be ruling out some properties, both that are already set back from the street and therefore inactive, the water store, Miss Bliss and Alexander's, that kind of thing, or ones that were on a second story and so therefore are not currently active, but would still be probably a perfectly fine place to have a cannabis store. I feel really bad because these people seem like really nice people and I want them to succeed at their business. But knowing how strongly the town felt about not having them directly on that main street, I feel like letting them be in a spot that everybody was pretty clear, like in that, like in right on the street like that with that inactive storefront, would be setting them up to receive the ire of people who are not happy that we approved it in the first place and was against, I guess, the spirit of what I had meant when I thought about trying not to exempt certain properties. I wish they'd found a different vacant property than this one. I also, when I thought that they could probably be able to meet the criteria of active storefront, was unaware, as I can tell from the tenor of the staff report, they probably were as well, and feel kind of bad about this, that we didn't manage to exclude this very well from the beginning so that this kind of conflict wouldn't happen. But I thought that the LCRB would have allowed them to have, an art display or something in the front, like a black velvet divider, and then they could display some local artworks or, concert posters, things that some of the travel agents do that, right? And the fact that they're not allowed to do that is a surprise to me. So I would be probably in the camp of changing my vote for this specific location. And I'm very sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was one of the ones who opposed it initially, and I think I do appreciate Councillor Wainwright's comments with regards to reconsidering a decision previously made, but we do have new information, as is indicated in the staff report, and that is, while we discussed inactive storefront, there is a difference between what we put in our policy at the same time we approved that amendment to the zoning bylaw, and what we now understand is the rule of having an opaque window. And I would ask council members to, if they could, turn to the page in the proponent's package that shows the proposed storefront. It's in the addendum to the application. And so you see on the awning it says the word cannabis, and in the window, which is clearly opaque, it has some graphic design, and in very large letters has Happy Buddha. In our current zoning bylaw, and this has been the case since I became a business owner in 2001, our current zoning bylaw does not allow particular uses, commercial uses on Beacon Avenue. And included in those uses would be exchange the word cannabis for physician, dentist, accountant, lawyer, and the such. And so you could have Happy Buddha lawyer, you could have Happy Buddha dentist, and they would not currently be permitted on Beacon Avenue. And the reason that was put in our zoning bylaw quite some time ago is because that is in an active storefront in a predominantly shopping district. And the intent is to have as active storefronts as you can. And so I think we're setting a dangerous precedent. If you permit cannabis Happy Buddha, then what's to prevent a dentist, an accountant, a lawyer coming forward and asking for the same variance? And while I respect this proponent's application, I have stated previously that I'm fully in support of having a cannabis location in Sydney. I think a further distinction that we've made, that we're proposing to be made in a subsequent resolution, would be to amend the policy to draw a distinction between directly fronting Beacon Avenue and a setback of 15 meters, which would therefore allow it to be, for example, in the Save On Food Shoppers Drug Mart little mall area, or across from that where the Charles Dickens Pub and those sorts of businesses are. So I think there are there are differences from what we were considering previously in terms of the policy. I would just like to speak to one item in the proponent's letter. And one is, or two things. One is, at present, tourists and local folks must leave Sydney in favor of Victoria when they wish to pursue legal cannabis. Happy Buddha posits that our comfortable and appealing legal cannabis store will encourage these customers to stay, shop, eat, and enjoy Sydney events. I agree with that. I think the business could be very successful off Beacon Avenue, and I've stated the reasons with regards to it being a precedent. The second I'd like to draw attention to is Happy Buddha's proposed storefront on Beacon Avenue is designed to breathe life into a commercial space that had been vacant for over 18 months. I don't think it's a good reason to put a business in a location as in an active storefront just to fill a vacant space. We could make that case for any of the vacant spaces, and again, it could lead to a precedent. Well, if a space has been vacant for 2 years, why don't we allow an accountant to go into that location? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor McNeil Smith. We go to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to be honest, I was a little perplexed by that portion of the staff report that, because I read the regulations and I was perfectly understanding that it was opaque. I didn't see any transparency when anything I read. So when I said I was okay with Beacon Avenue, I knew what I was saying. I understood it was to be an opaque storefront. I do have issue with the active storefront because I took a walk around that block for a good while, all around it, up and down. Just up from their TD, I wouldn't call that an active storefront. Royal Bank up the other way, that's not an active storefront. You go down to the Telus building by the old 7-Eleven, that is not an active storefront. The tobacconist shop has an active storefront of sorts, a lot of pipes promoting smoking. Is that a good thing? I don't know. I don't have a problem with the location, I really don't. Just from what I was just walking around looking at what's in that area, I like their plan. I like the way they've paid attention to detail. They've crossed every T and dotted every I, with the exception of this one particular thing, this active storefront and the transparency and the opaque. And it really, for me, it's not a blocker. I want to encourage somebody who's an entrepreneur to come into our community and provide a service that people need and want. And I just feel like I'm being punitive by saying that the reasons they're stating. I like option 2 in here I circle that option 2 to make those changes to your terms of distance and stuff after. But I just feel like this is being punitive to them for all the work they've put in. And I mean, there's opaque places on Beacon already, and how do you distinguish that they can't have it, but they can? And to me, it just makes no sense. And I want to promote businesses coming into our community. We want to make our community thrive, and this is a great opportunity to do that. So that's where I stand on this issue.
Thank you. I now go to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Chair. So I think what's, I thought you cut me off on purpose.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. So I concur with all of the comments that the mayor made in regards to the active storefront. I think it's an important thing to maintain, especially when we hear from our retailers in downtown Sydney that there's concern about maintaining vibrancy and business down there. So I think that's an important aspect. In regards to other storefronts that are currently maybe not as interactive, my understanding from comments, I think that Councillor Fallett had got information from staff that there might be some storefronts along Beacon that are not interactive, but they were grandfathered because they came, those were put in place prior to that rule being in place. So I think it's an important thing to maintain the interactivity. I get staff's comments that perhaps that they thought when we reviewed this the first time that there was perhaps they envisioned a little bit more flexibility, as Councillor Duncan said. So I intend to support the motion that's been put forward.
Thank you, Councillor Keefe. I'm just going to take priority here because I haven't spoken yet to this. I voted in favor of Beacon Avenue. I will be changing my mind and supporting the motion. My concern is the degree of coverage that the window has to have. I thought that there would be more available, that they could have something in the window. So it does concern me with that. And just slightly going over to the further on down, I know this isn't the part of the question right now, it's a 15 feet from Beacon Avenue. I have an issue with that as well because you still have pedestrians. So if you're walking along the mall at Save On Foods, if you're walking past there, it might not be on Beacon Avenue, but I sort of don't get that relationship of why it's okay 15 feet away and not right up on Beacon Avenue. So I won't be voting, or I will be voting in favor of the motion. So, Councillor Wainwright.
There are several things that have come up in the discussion that I wanted to pick up on. And first one is the comment about the zoning bylaw and the potential for doctor, dentist, whatever, applying for a variance for this. The one thing you can't apply for, well, two things. You can't apply for a variance on density or use. So if the zoning bylaw prohibits doctor's offices on Beacon or elsewhere, you can't apply for a variance to allow a doctor's office. You can apply for rezoning, but you cannot apply for a variance. So just to clarify that one, and I'm sure staff will correct me if I'm wrong, but I see head shaking. And I can appreciate people changing their mind and wanting to have some different criteria. If we're going to go that route, I would ask us to be very careful about being clear about what those criteria are, because we've had a business in good faith spend money pursuing their application and bringing it forward. And if we say no, and we're vague about it, about what's going to be acceptable, why would anyone come back? And it's not fair to, I don't think we should be vague about direction. So if there's something that we find acceptable and something that isn't, we should be very clear about it. I point out that our policy only applies to liquor and cannabis. It doesn't deal with tobacconists or other kinds of storefronts, which is why the TELUS building can have a completely not interactive, and in fact, once the building is built and somebody goes in, they can choose to essentially black out their windows, as Home Hardware has basically done. And this policy doesn't apply just to Beacon Avenue. It's to our entire downtown. So the motion as it stands, I don't think is a good motion. I mean, you might go with the initial part if the majority wants to say no, but if we're going to amend that policy, we should be very clear about it. Because if you're only looking at amending it for Beacon Avenue, the motion does not say that. Right? So personally, when I voted on the zoning amendment, I was anticipating that somebody would apply on a storefront in Beacon, and I was not thinking about maybe we should word it so they have to be a certain distance setback from Beacon or whatever. So I'm unhappy that that if the majority were thinking of that particular outcome, that we didn't provide clear direction so that they didn't incur whatever expenses in pursuing this. I would be in favor of option 2, and I would just point out, option 2 is similar to a variance application. It's to advertise it for public input. Like here, if you actually reject it now, what you're saying is you're not even interested in hearing from the public. You're just going to say no now. Whereas with most variances that come in, unless they're truly offensive, we we let people comment and then we make the decision.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe?
I guess just to Councillor Wainwright's point, what's different about this is that the provincial government gives us the authority to say no to cannabis applications, retail cannabis applications is my understanding. So I don't see that, the way, what I understood you were saying is that we should go out to ask the public for additional input if we're going to reject this, and I don't see that there's a requirement to do that. If we're not satisfied with this, we can say no. And I guess the other thing is the rules about active storefronts and about the size of signs that are allowed on front windows are not new things. Those were things that were always there. And while I accept, that, council did have that discussion about active storefronts, council didn't change their mind in regards to, we're now going to allow that. So it's still in the zoning bylaw, it's still in the rules, and I'm in favor of, sticking with that.
Thank you. And Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And perhaps just for point of clarification to Councillor Wainwright's comments, I believe he was speaking directly to the second option, which is not the motion that's on the floor. Having said that, I don't know that there's not an opportunity for Councillor Wainwright or anyone else not to move that once this particular motion that's on the floor has been addressed. So I don't think that door is being closed yet. At least that wasn't my understanding.
Any further discussion? Councillor Wainwright?
So the motion that's on the floor is directing us to respond to LCRB that we don't support the application, and that would be in effect to tell them to deny the application. To then advertise the application for comment doesn't seem like a realistic motion to follow up to the one that's on the floor. So I don't think I'm misreading the motion. It is in fact to deny the application. With respect to the inactive storefront, it's actually not in the zoning bylaw. It's a guideline in the OCP.
Councillor Rintoul? Sorry, Mr. Humble first.
Yeah, I might defer this to Ms. Verhagen with respect to this, but I think it's under, actually it's the sign bylaw that speaks to the size of opaque sign that's permitted within a window, and I think it's a maximum of 50%. So it's actually covered in the sign bylaw. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul, did you?
No, it's fine.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions? Then I will call the question that is on the floor. All in favor? Opposed? That is 3 opposed. Motion carries. There are 2 more points there. Are we going to leave those off, or are we just going to? All right, then, Councillor Wainwright.
So I don't think we've really provided direction to staff about the nature of the amendment to this policy DV015 that council wants to see. And I'm not going to propose an amendment because I'm happy with what was there before, but it would seem like if you want to see these business people open up somewhere else, give them some direction. And the policy should provide that direction.
Councillor Duncan.
Yeah, thank you. I was prepared to move point 2, that staff be directed to bring forward an amendment to section 2B of policy DV15 that removes the requirement for active and transparent storefronts for cannabis retail store locations. And 3, that staff be directed to bring forward an amendment to zoning bylaw number 2015 that would require cannabis retail locations to maintain a minimum 15-meter setback from any property line directly adjacent to Beacon Avenue. Actually, maybe I should ask also, through the chair to staff, does that accept second stories? So if it's in a second story, but the building, but technically its storefront is less than 15 meters, is it excluded?
Through the chair to Councillor Duncan, the recommendation here isn't specific to ground floor or second story. So if council would like to be specific about that, now's the time.
Okay, so then I would say to maintain a minimum 15-meter setback from any property line directly adjacent to Beacon Avenue, excepting businesses on stories of second stories and above.
Do we have a seconder? Don't see a seconder. Motion fails. Councillor O'Keefe?
I'll try. I would move, actually, everything that Councillor Duncan said in terms of number 3, so that we look at the 15-meter setback and second floors on Beacon. So.
But not the second. You're moving
Yeah, I'm just moving number 3.
Oh, so you're just gonna, so instead of doing 2 and 3, you're just,
Yeah,
Oh, she needs to second her first.
yeah, so I'll float that up there.
You know what? Second, so then at least one part will go through.
okay, so we got point 3 moved and seconded. Discussion. Councillor Wainwright.
So the issue really, the LCRB requirement, they can't get a license unless they have an opaque storefront.
Yeah.
So if you leave in the policy a requirement for an active and transparent storefront, you're basically, and it applies to the entire downtown, you're actually saying, despite having done a zoning amendment to make this legal in the town, and we're about to make yet another zoning amendment regarding, allowing it in the town, you're going to have a policy that prohibits it everywhere in the downtown. So I think, wow, that really seems odd.
Mayor McNeil Smith.
I think what we have here is we need to consider these separately. And I think if I agree, I concur with Councillor Wainwright, and I'd be prepared to make a different motion for number 2, but we have number 3. Sorry, number 3 was moved.
Moved, I think.
Oh, yeah, it was second.
One moment, please go through this. Ms. Verhagen.
Through the chair, for clarification to staff, would you repeat the wording that you added to number 3 about stories above the ground floor or not? Did you add anything to there or not? Just, I didn't hear.
So it was that staff be directed to bring forward an amendment to zoning bylaw number 2015 that would require cannabis retail locations to maintain a minimum 15-meter setback from any property line directly adjacent to Beacon Avenue, excepting businesses on second stories and higher.
Does that work, staff?
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, sorry, point of order. Sorry, I believe Councillor O'Keefe made the motion?
Yes, but I didn't
And-
think she changed it. But it was.
And the motion, if I may finish,
Yeah.
if the motion that you made is the motion as written, not as amended by Councillor Duncan.
No, when I made the motion, it was kind of what she said.
Yes, that's what I understood as well.
I appreciate the clarification.
So, and Councillor Duncan, did you second? Yes.
Yes.
All right. So now we open for discussion.
So for clarification, the change is then to permit cannabis locations on second stories or above on Beacon Avenue.
Councillor Wainwright.
Just for clarification, so this zoning amendment is strictly Beacon Avenue, and nobody has any concern about a cannabis store right around the corner, being right on the street. It's just only Beacon Avenue, because again, it would be really unfortunate if somebody invests a lot of time and money pursuing an application and then you're going to tell them no as well. So I'm just encouraging the people who have concerns about this to ensure that you're addressing all your concerns.
Further discussion? Councillor Duncan.
I think I'll just address Councillor Wainwright's because I had concerns. Personally, I share his personal opinion about the active storefronts on Beacon, but this was my compromise because Beacon Avenue seemed to be the lightning rod and nobody else who voted against it initially seemed to have much of a problem with it off Beacon. So for me, the additional compromise is required on Beacon, but not off of it. It didn't seem to draw the same kind of public comment to it, so.
Councillor Wainwright.
Sorry, a follow-up one. You're going to wind up having a public hearing on this, and there is always the possibility you're going to have a large number of people turn up and say, don't do this, let them just do it on Beacon without a setback. But at that point, you'll already have denied the application. Would it make sense to hold the application till you finish changing your policies and zoning and see what the public input on it is?
Councillor Duncan.
I was in favor of them getting their permit this time. I didn't vote against it, so yeah, it's not going to go to the public consultation stage at this point because Barbara changed her vote and voted against it. So this was my compromise to try and make sure that now that this one has not been approved, that the concerns that came up have now been incorporated back into the zoning bylaw so that next time that vote won't change.
Councillor O'Keefe, did you? No. I still look at it as the 15-meter setback doesn't make any sense to me. That one doesn't cut it for me. Either it's on Beacon Avenue or it's not on Beacon Avenue. Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Thank you. I believe the reason for the distinction is because the term directly fronting. So
Okay.
An active storefront will impact a pedestrian the closer it is to Beacon Avenue. If you are walking on the sidewalk on Beacon Avenue past Save On Foods, it's not the same. The active storefront or inactive storefront is not impacting you the same as if you are immediately adjacent to it walking on the sidewalk where the business is at the property line. So that's the distinction.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, I guess what I was just trying to do here is, we need to provide some further direction in terms of what will be acceptable. So we've said that in the first motion that we're not happy with opaque storefronts, and so I don't see that that's going to change. I don't think so. I guess I saw this as a compromise.
Okay.
That, okay, if they were set back far enough, or if they were at least on the second floor, that there wouldn't be that concern about interactivity with the street and the opaque storefront. So that's kind of what my thinking was. So that at least businesses would have that clarity in the future that, okay, although personally I'm not thrilled about them being on Beacon at all for other reasons, in terms of this aspect of it, I thought that might help address it, but.
All right, then, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to that note, not trying to be obstructionist, I'm not going to support it simply because, you know, I didn't support it being on Beacon initially, and certainly active storefront was a part of that, but proximity to other family-oriented opportunities in the community were a concern to me, and so I just, to be clear, I'm not comfortable with that location on Beacon, and I don't think amending the bylaws is in this manner is going to address my personal concern, just so that my position is clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Just a point of clarification, it's not really a true statement to say, Councillor O'Keefe, that we've said we don't want opaque. The majority of council said that, because I was okay with it. Just, and as far as having this particular kind of business close to a family-oriented business, where are they going to go in Sydney then? You can say that just about any business we have here. I mean, we're going to put them out in the airport. You know, we've said we're going to have licensed cannabis sales in Sydney. And how prescriptive do we want to get as to where we're going to allow these people to open a store, or any other applicant that comes forward? It's head scratching for me, I have to be honest. I see sort of your point of view, but you can literally say that about every store in Sydney, that you could bring your family into it. I mean, you can even take your kids into the liquor store, hypothetically, and it's legal to do that. They can't buy anything, but they can be with you. They can't go into a cannabis store, so that's stringent. So I mean, I'm just trying to figure out where we're going to put them then. If your whole hang-up is based on being related or close to other family-oriented businesses, there's really nowhere else to go. So, I mean, I still don't have a problem with it. I mean, I'll respect the wishes of council, but that argument doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you. Mayor McNeil-Smith.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we have a situation where if we disagree with the minimum 15-meter setback, we have in a previous motion denied an application on Beacon Avenue because of the opaque window. So we do, I believe, need to make an amendment to the zoning bylaw with regards to Beacon Avenue. This addresses Beacon Avenue, not on Beacon Avenue, if it's a 15-meter setback. If we don't agree, and what I'm suggesting is to, if someone is opposed to this minimum 15-meter setback, you would still be opposed to it being on Beacon Avenue, then we would have to have an amendment to that. We can't leave, if we've denied an application on Beacon Avenue, we can't deny or oppose number 3 and not have something in place speaking to Beacon Avenue. I hope that doesn't muddy the waters.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe.
I'm just trying to get some further clarity on. So my understanding is that if we don't approve this, we're going to have to do something to bring some clarity. So either we're going to have to say, okay, we'll agree to this on Beacon under these circumstances, or we will have to say, in light of the additional information that we've got from staff about opaque windows, etc., we have maybe the motion is that we do not allow cannabis retail on Beacon, period. Is that
for clarification? Yes.
Yeah.
If
Yes.
we've denied an application on Beacon Avenue, we need to amend the zoning bylaw to reflect that, and we are in this motion, but we've added an additional point with regards to the 15-meter setback. If members are not comfortable with the 15-meter setback, then we should have we should test an amendment removing that, which would still, well, no, the wording of the motion doesn't deal with Beacon Avenue.
So what I'm trying to understand the intent, what you're trying to get to with the amendment that you're.
The intent is, at a minimum, what I'm suggesting to committee is at a minimum, we need a motion amending the zoning bylaw to not permit cannabis retail, at least on ground floor on Beacon Avenue. Given that we've denied an application on Beacon Avenue. We would have to amend it, I think we're gonna have to amend this motion to say that more clearly. If I may go through the staff.
Mr. Humble?
There is an opportunity to call the question on this and see
I was
whether
just
or not
gonna-
it passes or fails, and then look at an alternative motion as suggested by the mayor. Just
Ms.
to,
Verhagen, did you?
Just through the chair to the committee members, just to clarify on the provincial legislation, if council has allowed cannabis retail as a use, each application is considered on a case-by-case basis, and council can still deny an application even if it is permitted in the location. It doesn't necessarily follow that the zoning bylaw must be amended just because you've denied this one, just to make sure that you're clear on what the legislation allows.
Okay. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you for that clarification, staff. And I guess despite that, you know, we seem to have this blanket veto over anything that comes forward. I think in fairness to businesses, as, you know, Councillor Wainwright mentioned earlier, business that are gonna come forward in good faith that wanna set up business, I think we should have, it needs to be really clear to them before they go and you know, invest in renting space and making plans to set up business. I don't think it's fair to leave them hanging to think, which way is the wind gonna blow on a particular day at council? Who's gonna be there? And, well, really, you know, I mean, you know, as Councillor Wainwright said, we have, whatever we do here, it has to be clear so businesses know whether they can set up shop on Beacon. So to me, it's either, yes, you can be on Beacon, but you have to be, there has to be a 15-meter setback, or you have to be on the second floor or higher. So I think that's what's currently there. And I guess the other option, if that was defeated, is that we just do not allow cannabis retail on Beacon, period.
Okay, I think we've had a good discussion. I will just say that, although I'd said I didn't, the 15-meter setback didn't make sense, there is some compelling argument. I can go with that. So I'm going to call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is defeated. Okay. Yes, Mayor McNeil Smith.
Again, if we're going to give direction to future applicants with regards to location, given that we've denied an application on Beacon Avenue for particular reasons, I would make a motion that we amend, bring forward an amendment to zoning bylaw number 2105 that would require, that would not allow cannabis retail locations on Beacon Avenue.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. 3 opposed, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Garnett, and Councillor Wainwright.
You should actually ask for the show of hands.
Oh,
but-
sorry. Okay, all in favor? And opposed? Thank you, thank you. Actually, it's committee member McNeil Smith, isn't it, busy? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A question through to staff. With regards to number 2, I appreciate that we have denied it, but again, we have a policy, a section of our policy currently inconsistent with the liquor and cannabis branch. And I don't think we should leave that discrepancy in place. So given that we defeated that particular motion, in essence, I believe we should actually rescind that motion. And we currently have in the policy.
There's no motion, Mr. Mayor.
There was just no seconder on that.
Oh, sorry.
hasn't been moved, the second one, the second one.
Oh, the second, sorry, the number 2 did not receive a seconder.
No.
Yeah.
Plus 3 didn't receive a second.
Okay, sorry. So I'll speak to the similar fact with regards to 3, that we currently have the wording transparent, active and transparent in the policy DV015. That is not consistent with the liquor and cannabis branch as further provided to us
Yeah.
by staff in the staff report. So I would again seek to make this motion that we should be amending.
Do you want to move it? I'll second it.
I just moved.
Second.
Second. Discussion. Council, or Committee Member Wainwright.
So, I mean, in this case, it is just a no-brainer. It's inconsistent with the LCRB regulation for cannabis. But for liquor stores, we don't want to take that out. And your motion is cannabis only. So it's not taking it out for liquor. It does seem like a no-brainer. I don't agree with my colleagues on the zoning stuff, but this one I can go for.
Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Thank you. That closes 7B. And we move to 7C, which is Development Variance Permit Application Number DV 100285 at 10379, 10383, and 10387 All Bay Road to retroactively approve the construction of 2 sets of beach stairs, and the alteration of an existing set of beach stairs. We have a report from October 16, 2019, and there is a recommendation. Staff or council, what is your pleasure? Committee Member McNeil Smith.
Thank you. I would move option number 3. Number 1, that all owners and tenants and occupation of property within 75 meters, 246 feet of 10379, 10383, and 10387 All Bay Road be notified regarding development variance permit application number DV 100285, bracket to reduce the required setback to the natural boundary from 7.6 meters to 0 meters in order to legalize the construction of 2 beach access stairwells and the alteration to an existing stairwell within the required setback to the natural boundary, on bracket, and that any written correspondence received before forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance subject to the following condition. And 2, that the applicant forfeit a $10,000 portion of the landscape deposit to go towards environmental enhancement in the Roberts Bay environmentally sensitive area. A question through to staff. Do we need to move well, it's not a point, so we don't need to move the point from following?
Correct.
So I'll just move number 1 and number 2.
Do we have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you. Discussion? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. So we have 4 options here, and we've received additional information since we originally considered this. And to try and keep it simple, if we may, in terms of creating a stairway down to beach, to have beach access, there are 2 options for a proponent. One is if that they're going to build a structure, and the current concrete stairs are considered a structure under our bylaws, that there be a variance application. The second option is a DP minor, which is not a variance, and that would be to put in permeable surface and flagstone, or something to that effect, and that would be permitted. It would not come before council. So the situation is that, as originally presented to us, we understood that there was only the option of a variance or not. And so if we were to deny the variance application, the applicant would be required to remove the current concrete steps, but then they would be allowed to apply for a DP minor and put in different steps, such as gravel and flagstone. And so I don't believe it's worthwhile to disturb the area a second time and a third time. And option 4, which was not before us previously, included that the applicant submit revised drawings to show modifications to the stairs to increase permeability. I think if there was a simple solution to changing the concrete stairs that are currently in place to being permeable, that would have come forward by now, and I don't see a particular option for that. So that's the reason for doing this. Now, I want to go back to a circumstance, and that is at the time of the issuance of the building permit, there was a landscape drawing that the proponent provided. And while there was previous landscape drawings, the drawing that was the final drawing that was as part of the building permit in that setback area for those 3 stairwells did not show any stairs. It showed the retaining wall. And in brackets beside each of the 3 sets of each of the 3 sets of pathways, it said no excavation in the setback area. So it was clear to the proponent, given that they had submitted those landscape drawings, that they were not going to put in stairs. Now, they were permitted, the process to go ahead and put in stairs was as I described. They could either apply for a variance application to put in a structure, or they could do a DP minor and put in something less minor. Another part of the process was with regards to archaeological remains, and they did go through that process correctly, and there's no question that they did that, and they received the necessary permit with regards to disturbing the area and archaeological remains. However, this experienced proponent should know that if they were going to construct something further to those landscape drawings that showed no stairs, they should have applied for some permit, and they didn't do that. And hence, I'm supportive of the applicant forfeiting a $10,000 portion of their landscape deposit to go towards environmental enhancement in recognition of their error in not applying for a permit.
Thank you. Committee Wainwright, committee member.
So I follow all the logic that Mayor McNeil-Smith has put forward, and because it's a development permit area, those plans are actually registered on title. For an experienced developer not to recognize the process and go ahead and do this, and actually go through all the effort of dealing with all the archaeology, but ignoring the town's process, is something that deserves a penalty. And I appreciate there is a suggestion of forfeiting $10,000. On 3 waterfront homes, $10,000 is peanuts, and really does not seem like an adequate penalty for an experienced developer ignoring our process. And part of what is influencing my thinking is the letter that was sent to Mayor and Council, not the current one dated October 18th, but the previous one, which expresses how hard done by the proponent is, and that staff is, if not completely to blame, at least significantly to blame for what happened. And that seems to me something that makes me lean towards the far end of the scale if we're going to apply a penalty. So while I could support the general concept of the motion that's going forward, I don't believe, I won't support it being only $10,000.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A lot of the same concerns that I have as well. I'm actually fine with sticking with option 1. an experienced developer should know. This isn't a homeowner who measures a fence incorrectly to build a garage or a shed because they're just going where the fence line is and it's probably moved over the course of time. It's an environmentally sensitive area, and I understand that going back and digging up again is probably not the greatest thing to have happen. But we have these rules in place for a reason for these areas. They're environmentally sensitive areas. And to go ahead and willfully build these stairs, and I believe knowing they didn't have the right to do that based on everything I've read, it goes against everything we're supposed to stand for. And I went and I looked at the sites. Unfortunately, tide was in, so it was tricky, but I got there and I can see what they're talking about the roots for that one fir tree. The stairs are very close to it. Looking to see what other people had already there. A lot of them are obviously quite a bit older. But we need to protect this area, and I feel that the stairs need to come out, and they need to be held accountable, because we could be down this road again in the future. Who's to say some other developer doesn't do the same thing and go down the same line? And I don't want to be back in that position again. This is too important of an area in our community. And I think we need to do the most to protect it and to send a message that we will do that. Thank you.
Committee Member O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I'm also concerned this is an environmentally sensitive area. However, my understanding of what's before us is that in terms of what was required to protect the environment, in terms of there was the trees, the fir trees that had to be kept on the property, and they need to have fencing around that, so that requirement was met. There was concern about blue heron's nests, and that was met. There was the archaeology permit that was required, and that was met. So my understanding of this situation is, although it's not great that they built concrete stairs that are non-permeable. To me, that's the environmentally sensitive thing. What I'm understanding the variance for is not to let them off the hook for vandalizing, if you will, an environmentally sensitive area, because I don't believe that that's what took place. The oversight on their part was that they failed to get a permit to construct stairs. And that's what I understand this is about. It's not about sending a message necessarily about environmentally sensitive areas. It's a fact that they should have got a permit for the stairs, and they didn't do that. Whether, to me, after reading through the myriad of documentation from staff and the applicant, I'm not feeling that there was necessarily a wanton disregard for all of the town's regulations. After reading the material, after meeting with them and talking to them, they acknowledge that yes, they should have done that, and it was an oversight on their part. When I talked to them, they spoke very highly of staff, the amount of support that they got from staff. So I didn't get the sense that they are trying to wash their hands of this and say that they're not responsible. I think they seem to accept responsibility for this. I don't think that there's any value to the greater community interest or that area to have them ripped apart again. So I'm happy to support the motion for option 3 as it is.
Thank you. Committee Member Rentoul, and then Duncan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, through to staff, if you could refresh my memory, I seem to recollect that the amount of the landscape deposit was around $70,000, if I'm not mistaken. Does that sound?
Through the chair to Councillor Rentoul, I think it's slightly less than that. I'm hearing somebody say something about 60,000. I can't recall the exact amount. But.
Okay. Thank you. I'm comfortable with what's been moved here personally. Although I'm also sympathetic to the fact that $10,000 to go towards an environmental enhancement in the Roberts Bay environmentally sensitive area may not have the type of efficacy we would like to see under the circumstances. I would have been, comfortable to see that amount at sort of $10,000 per, so $30,000 in total. It seems like that would be in keeping with the amount of the landscape deposit. Having said that, what's most important, I think, in my mind, is I don't see the value in going back to remove these stairs because of the disruption it's going to recreate. And so I'll support the motion as has been moved. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee Member Duncan?
Thank you. I think Councillor O'Keefe put it very well, and the mayor's logic was good. I had originally thought, why not option 4? But I think you explained very well why not option 4. I've been looking forward through the previous packages, trying to find if it had somewhere in there what the landscape deposit was. The original options that had come to us were to forfeit a $10,000 to $15,000 portion of the landscape deposit. So this one's actually gone down from what we could have done before. And so I'm kind of in agreement with Councillor Wainwright. I wish I could know what they'd actually paid, and just knowing that their other option would probably be from this council, has mentioned option 1, would be the cost of digging that out again and then rebuilding it, each time having to hire an archaeologist to watch them and make sure that they fulfill their archaeological branch permits. They'd be paying a lot of money if they were forced to pull that out and rebuild it. So a higher forfeiture would be probably still a good deal for them, and it would be better for us. So I'm wondering if the mover would accept a friendly amendment, but I'm trying to figure out what the amount I want to say is. I'm gonna be like 40 grand each.
Thank you. Just go to staff, Mr.
Yeah.
Humble.
If I may, so under an MTF, we don't have the statutory capacity to actually withhold a large, significant amount. This is, from a staff perspective, this is seen as a compromise. So I just want to make that clear to council.
Thank you, Mr. Humble. Committee Member McNeil Smith?
Thank you. A clarification to staff. If the proponent pays, has to pay a $60,000 or $70,000 landscape deposit, why would there not be permission to withhold a significant or all of that portion?
The withholding of the deposit is until he makes good with respect to the requirements. So it would be removing the stairs and putting it back. But that's not what the motion is. It's to retain a portion.
So the statutory rules don't speak to penalty.
Not this amount, correct.
Thank you.
Committee Member Wainwright?
So I just wanted to pick up on the comment that the proponent speaking very highly of staff, and that sort of comment, and I'll just quote out of the proponent's letter dated October 11th, which is in the agenda package if anyone wants to find it. We believe we are being treated unfairly, and that the recommendation from staff to remove the stairs is socially, economically, and environmentally irresponsible. And then at the end of the paragraph, there were a series of town staff oversights which, if not contributors to the situation, certainly could have prevented it. I am not seeing the proponent speaking highly of staff. I'm seeing the exact opposite. And I don't believe that any of the information that staff has provided to us, things like the plans registered on title very clearly showing no stairs, make it really seem like staff did not contribute to this situation. So I guess I just don't accept that the proponent's being a real sweetheart and thinking highly of our staff.
Thank you. I'm just going to make a couple of comments, if I may. to look at the option of now removing the steps, I think would be penalizing our environment unnecessarily. I would like to say remove them and then come through an application process and do it properly and make sure it adheres to all the requirements. Unfortunately, the stairs are there, and I think it is a greater respect to our environment to leave them. Having said that, I also don't feel that the $10,000 is an adequate amount to say, all right, that is, but I also hear what staff tell us, that we don't have the right to withhold the deposit. But if there's some way of making a comment to the individual that this is the feeling of council, is that that's hardly an adequate amount in a conversation, I don't know if we have any other teeth to go with that. So my thought is I will support this. I'm not in favor of the $10,000.
I'll move an amendment that we change the 10,000 to 20,000.
So is that considered a friendly amendment?
Don't think so. It needs a secondary.
I think we should, point of order, I think we should discontinue on our council committee process referring to friendly amendment. We make an amendment or not, and we approve it by resolution or not.
Okay, so we've got an amendment. Do you have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you. Discussion? Go ahead, Committee Member Garnett.
I just want to reiterate my feelings on this, that I just can't help but thinking that we're setting ourselves up for problems, because there's nothing to prevent somebody else from doing the exact same thing moving forward. To me, that's the message this sends. That's a paltry sum of money for the sale of these properties, and it's just a small price to pay for enhancing these homes on that waterfront in an area that was not supposed to have this done. And I totally understand what you're saying about disturbing it again, but I worry about where this leads going forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Committee Member O'Keefe?
Thank you. So, getting back to Mr. Humble's comment about we don't have the statutory authority, it sounds to me, to do this. Towns can't just, unless there was something in our bylaw that said you're going to get fined $10,000 for each infraction for these things. I don't know that we have the legal authority to hold back to penalize them. I agree with the comments that they should be, some penalty in some way, but I think going too high, as Mr. Humble says, is I don't know that we have the authority to do that.
And that is my concern as well. So any further discussion? Mr. Humble?
Yeah, given that it's not statutory, we don't have the statutory authority. Certainly the developer can see this as a potential compromise. An amount that he would be prepared to pay, he needs to take into consideration, obviously, what would be the cost for him to remove the stairs, get the correct permits, etc. That could be significant as well. So really it's an opportunity to come to some sort of compromise with the proponent in terms of what's appropriate given the magnitude of what's transpired. So I guess from my perspective, staff are comfortable bringing forward to the proponent a suggested penalty, in terms of it, and the proponent could agree to pay that based on the alternative, which is potentially removing the stairs, etc., and the costs associated with that, or he could push back. So it's just good to be aware for council to be cognizant of that.
Okay, then I will call, yes, Committee Member McNeil Smith.
In the second letter that was received as a late item to us from the proponent, Councillor Wainwright read from the first letter. The proponent speaks directly to not to stating that they do not believe a penalty is the correct. They do not support the imposition of a penalty because they didn't think they acted wrongly. So I think there is the potential there for it to be challenged. And my question through the staff would be if they were to challenge it, we would be basically having approved the stairs remaining, but it could wind up with there being zero penalty.
It's difficult. It's difficult to say where this could end up. I mean, it could be a legal challenge. We could be back at discussing what to do with the stairs if it's challenged through the proponent's solicitor.
Thank you. Yes. Committee Member.
Sorry, if I may have a follow-up. I don't know of a precedent for this, but we could table this motion and we could request staff discuss the proponents, given the expression of concern by committee this evening. Staff could meet with the proponent and inquire, given the discussion that we've had, whether they would be accepting of a penalty and would agree not to challenge. I don't know, is there a precedent for that?
I guess what I was going to say related to that is we are in committee, and so we're not going to approve this for sure tonight. What we're directing staff, my understanding is that we're going to notify people in the area, and we're going to seek public input, and then it's going to come back to us, to council. So I guess what I'm thinking is, could we not just proceed with that? We'll let the applicant know that what we have proposed is in terms of $10,000, and in between, so there's some negotiating time there while we get public input and before it comes back to council for the developer to say, yeah, okay, I can live with that, and then our final approval will be at next council, is my understanding.
Sure, that's absolutely a way forward. And just to clarify, and maybe Ms. Verhegen can speak to this, is the proponent, when the $10,000 as a penalty was mentioned, was at the time, was he at least verbally acceptable to that amount?
I can't speak specifically to that. No.
Okay. We've got Committee Member Wainwright and Rintoul and Garnett.
So I guess the one thing I'd point out is once the development variance permit application is approved, assuming that happens, the applicant asks for his deposit back, doesn't get the whole thing, has already got the variance, and then challenges that we didn't return the whole deposit, whether it's $1,000 short or $100,000 short, can still do it after he's got his variance permit. Granted that the town of Sydney would have a very long memory about that, and the proponent may not want to go down that route, but I just point out that and council has complete discretion about granting a variance or not. Once that variance is granted, I don't see anything stopping the proponent from asking for his deposit back. Because once we've approved the change in the landscaping, the proponent will have conformed with all the landscaping.
Thank you. Committee Member Rintoul.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I must admit, I had been reading these 2 points with the word "and" that the applicant forfeit as contingent on one another, which implies to me then an understanding with the applicant in advance that there will be a forfeiture. I don't know that the reference needs to be to a penalty. The motion reads forfeiture, and with an understanding that those funds go towards an environmental enhancement in the Roberts Bay environmentally sensitive area. And I expect it's probable that a developer in this community would likely recognize, the significance of that contribution, and as has been noted by colleagues, that it's a lot less money than the alternative. I'm cognizant of staff's warning here with regards to the amount of the penalty. I think Committee Member Duncan, when she referred back to previous reports, noted that there'd been a recommendation previously in the range of $10,000 to $15,000. So, the $20,000 isn't out of line. I'm less inclined to be, punitive as opposed to try and send a message here around this subject matter. And so I'm comfortable at 10,000 or 20 at the consensus of council, but more to the point that the second bullet be contingent on the motion as a whole. Thank you.
Okay, we've gotten a second motion, the amendment. So is there discussion on the amendment? Or are we going back? So we've got Councillor Garnett. Did you want to speak to the amendment?
Just to speak to something that came up with regards to any pushback or legal ramifications. I'm assuming option one, we're free and clear, there's no legal ramifications. We went through that route, they'd have no recourse? The staff, sorry?
Again, it's my understanding that at least verbally, that they would accept the $10,000 withhold.
No, sorry, I'm referring to the option I want to go with. Like, we're talking about, there's no, if option one, take the stairs out, it's denied, that's where we have every right to do that with no.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And Committee Member McNeil-Smith? Yeah.
I only mention this, a follow-up to Councillor Rintoul in that it may impact how we vote on the amendment, and that is the use of the word contingent. And so my question through the staff is, subsequent to voting on the amendment in terms of the amount, would it be permissible to make a further amendment with regards to the forfeiture being contingent, or sorry, the variance application being contingent on agreeing to forfeit 10,000?
Is that a question to staff?
That's a question through the staff. So therefore, if they did not agree to the forfeiture amount that we pass, whatever that amount is, then they would not receive the variance.
It's a challenging one. It's a challenging one, again, because it's not a statutory obligation. So, yeah, sorry, it's a challenging one for me to respond to.
Okay, is this new discussion, or should we just call the question on the amendment?
On the amendment, yes.
Okay, the question on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion fails, 4-3. So then we go back to the main motion, as Committee Member Rintoul read out. Any further discussion on that? Committee Member McNeil-Smith.
I will be opposing the motion. I think there is an opportunity here for the proponent to be granted a variance with no forfeiture, and I don't think that's appropriate in these circumstances. While I did express a concern over the disturbance, option number 2 is that the variance application be denied, but the second part to that is that the applicant apply for sorry, is it option 2 or? No, it was option 2, that if it was denied, that they would then proceed to apply for the necessary permits to reinstate the seawall or construct beach access stairs in compliance. So what would happen in that case is they would actually put the stairs that they should have put in the first place at the time that they take it out, rather than restoring it to a seawall and no stairs, and then coming forward, or a future applicant coming forward and disturbing the whole thing all over again. It's a lesser disturbance if you go with option 2 than if you go with option 1. Option 1, we leave the door open to it being restored to its original state, but then coming forward and not coming before committee or council, and a DP minor being issued for future significant disturbance. I won't be supporting the option 3.
Okay. Committee Member O'Keefe and Rintoul.
So, you know, in looking at that and looking at option 2, to me, they're equally as bad, because under option 2, it says this would require the removal of the stairs as constructed. So we're going to rip them out and damage that whole area all over again, and then allow replacement with stairs in compliance with the town bylaws. So for me, again, a big thing is reducing the amount of disruption in that area. And so option 2 to me is really no better than option 1, because it calls for the complete removal of the stairs and just putting something different in. So I'm happy to stick with option 3.
Okay. Yes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. As well, I'm happy to stick with option 3, and I would state, because I believe the developer has done good work in our community, and likely would recognize that this is not an unreasonable position for the town to take, and that I'm quite concerned about the prospect of going back in and incurring the disruption again. So I'm comfortable with this, and to the mayor's point with regard to this approval moving forward, potentially without addressing the issue of forfeiture. Again, it's committee of whole. I think we have an opportunity to revisit that when it comes before council. So I remain comfortable with option 3. Thank you.
Thank you. And Committee Member Wainwright.
While I did mention that the proponent could ask for that money back, I guess my personal view is, if the proponent did that, the next time that proponent needs any kind of approval that I have complete discretion over how I vote, a variance, a rezoning, an OCP amendment, I can pretty much guarantee the direction I'm going to lean. Obviously, I'm open-minded.
Obviously.
But I would be strongly leaning. So I don't think that the proponent, if they intend to do any business in Sydney that doesn't, absolutely conform to the existing zoning, would be wise in trying to claw that back.
Thank you. I can't guess what's in the proponent's mind and what their intention were. All I'm looking at is there are concrete stairs that were done without the appropriate authority, and they're in an environmentally sensitive area. I would like to see them gone, and for the process to be done properly, and if there are stairs going to be there, that they are stairs that are suited for that environment. My thinking is it's less disruptive to leave what is there. I also think $10,000 forfeiture is pretty light, but I will go with that given how we have to work with this. And so I'm prepared to support it, and I will now call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries with 2 opposed. Thank you very much, Committee Man. That brings us to 7D, which is Development Permit Application Number DP 100796, and development variance permit application DV 100286 at 9570 and 9574 Fifth Street to relax requirements for retaining walls in order to construct a 4-story, 16-unit multifamily residential development. And we have Mr. Gillespie, Mr. Gillespie here. Good evening, welcome, and the button for the, there you go. Mic is yours.
Fantastic, thank you. Some lively debate and conversations this evening. Thank you for allowing us to witness this. Good evening, Madam Chair, Your Worship, councillors, staff, members of the public. As you know, my name is Greg Gillespie, and I'm still the development manager for Mike Garrett Construction, 4520 West Saanich Road. As you know, we are the applicant for development permit and development permit variance at 9570, 9574 Fifth Street. Thank you for the opportunity to share our design changes with you this evening. I'm joined by our architect, Mr. Tony James, and our landscape architect, Mr. Keith Grant, who are available to assist me in answering any questions that council may have following my brief presentation. At its regular meeting of September 16th, council provided some very valuable feedback and direction related to our design, and this presentation will focus on those design changes that we made in response to council's comments. Specifically, council requested further consideration to the design and appearance of the west elevation, consider tiering of the retaining wall, and reviewing the massing of the rooftop structure to reduce its visual appearance. Regarding the west elevation, as we've shown here, we utilized additional materials and color to break up the west facade and introduce some articulation by adding small window bays, shown in wood grain here, thereby adding texture and some depth to the west elevation. In reviewing our drawings, APC members, as you may know, unanimously supported our proposed redesign and appearance of the west elevation. And this is a 3D view of the west elevation as well, showing the bays in wood grain and the added texture and articulation. Regarding the retaining walls, using the west elevation as an example, our previous design had the full height retaining wall on the property line, and this is shown on the left-hand side. Our revised design is shown on the right-hand side, where you can see the 2-tier retaining wall system. We have essentially split the difference at the highest point, such that the maximum retaining wall height is 1.65 meters, reducing our variance request to only 45 centimeters. You will note the 6-foot fence and 8-foot hedge shown on the left-hand side of each drawing, and these show the existing conditions on the neighboring properties, and I'll come back to this in a moment. The tiered system has allowed us to plant some additional shrubs along the west elevation, which you can see here on the right-hand side. And we agree with previous council comments that the tiering softens the retaining wall, and we're very pleased at how this turned out. While I've used the west elevation as an example, the tiering is evident along the north and the south sides as well. So here you can see the tiering on the west elevation with the added shrubbery on the second tier, and this carries around to both the north elevation and the south elevation as well. Again, in reviewing our updated design, APC members unanimously supported our proposed design of the new retaining walls. The final direction from council was to address the rooftop structure. In response, we have introduced a green wall to soften the overall massing and enhance our overall landscaping, as shown in the west elevation. In addition, we removed the private stair access that significantly reduced the rear setback on the rooftop and reduced the overall massing of the rooftop structure. Here was our original design that showed a secondary private stairwell access to the rear decks, and that's been removed. This west elevation really sums up the design changes that we've made, and I wanted to point out the existing conditions on the 2 neighboring properties to the west. Both properties have significant landscaping in place, such that our southwest neighbor, shown on the right-hand side of the drawing, has a 6-foot wooden fence, and our northwest neighbor, shown on the left-hand side of the drawing, has an existing 8-foot hedge. The existing landscaping obscures the entire first tier and much of the second tier. Pardon me, such that the visual impact of the retaining wall is minimized. Lastly, APC made 2 specific recommendations on how our proposal could be further improved with regards to hardscape and pavers and a lower fence height. Our design changes presented this evening have incorporated the lower fence height. You've seen that in all the drawings I've shown you now. And we've also addressed the hard surface areas along the property's frontage and the side yard access with the addition of pavers shown here. We're very grateful to council, staff, and APC for their constructive feedback and are very excited about this improved design. As outlined in a previous staff report, our team employed multiple design solutions to minimize the impact on the neighborhood, and we ask that committee pass the recommendations contained in the staff report this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we have Committee Member Wainwright.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When you look at the plan, we can see the roof structure, but that's because we're in a plan view. When we look at your artist's rendering, we don't actually see the roof structure. How far away, and that's, you know, I appreciate it, setback from the sides and also from the back. How far away do you have to be to actually be able to see that roof structure?
I would anticipate it's going to be several blocks away. These renderings are created based on the elevations that you see in the CAD files that the architect has used. So this isn't our best guess of what the rendering would look like. The software actually creates these rendered views based on the actual elevations and the actual architectural drawings. That rooftop structure will not be visible at ground level, as you see here. I would anticipate it would have to be several blocks away for you to begin to see that rooftop structure.
Yeah. So several blocks away takes you across the highway if you're heading west, or you're quite a bit, several blocks away takes you quite a distance down Lochside. Obviously, you're going to see it from the Anacortes Ferry as you approach. But I guess the question I'm sort of wondering about is the neighborhood's ability to see that roof structure. And this was really one of the key issues. And they have increased the setback from the west, and that affects your ability, how far away you have to be to actually be able to see it. So this was one of the things that kind of came out a bit in APC, and I just wanted to ask the question to bring that to committee's attention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a follow-up question with
Yep.
regards to the setback. If you could please, Mr. Gillespie, tell us what the change in the distance of the setbacks for the rooftop structure is? I appreciate the mass has changed, but what are the changes? What was it originally and what is it now in preferably feet, but meters if it's required?
I'll just refer to my drawings here. Thank you. I believe it is contained within the staff report, which I have on my phone, but I did not print off a copy. Let me just take a moment to confirm that, please, unless you happen to recall. Maybe staff through the chair. It looks like the staff can maybe confirm that for me.
Oh, here it is. It's,
The amount of the setback here, I think it was another 9
Ms.
meters.
Verhagen.
Sure, the staff report says the smaller rooftop structure was set back an additional 2.38 meters from the building's west face. So that's just under 10 feet. From the initially proposed setback of 9.7 meters, or about 32 feet, to the west building face to 12.08 meters to the west building face. So that 9-ish to 12-ish meters is the distance of this rooftop structure from the west building face, not from property line.
So the rooftop structure would actually be about 30 feet then for,
Yeah, the rear setback of the building plus this 12 meters from
okay,
the roof.
so that's a significant change. Thank you for the clarification.
And through the chair, my architect here had some additional comments to make on the view,
Yes.
further to Councillor Wainwright's
Please.
comments. Thank you. Mr. Attorney James.
We haven't done a computer-generated rendering from several blocks away, but if I could just get everybody to use their imagination, if you draw a straight line from the top of the rooftop down through the roof, the edge of the roof on the Fifth Street frontage, and carry that out, I think you could see without too much effort that you would be in fact quite a distance away before you'd see anything up there. Does that help at all, or am I just
I think
rationalizing?
that works for us, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you very much. And Committee Member Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Gillespie, for your presentation. I don't have any questions per se, more some comments. And I preface it by saying that you've worked within the constructs of what you're allowed to do, and what you've created. It's a building that will work in that area for providing extra housing. I guess what I find problematic about the whole thing, and like I said, this has nothing to do with you. You're working within what you're allowed to do, and you've done a good job of it.
Thank you.
When I was reading the original staff comments and saying was, I think Councillor Committee Member O'Keefe had mentioned that she didn't feel it was consistent with the intent of the OCP, and I still don't. And there was a mention of proposed development would meet a market demand for high quality condominiums just outside downtown Sydney. And I can't help but think that, do we need more high-end, high-quality, high-priced condominiums in Sydney? And I'd have to say, I think no. Based on all the developments we already have going, and ones that have been approved and haven't started, we're going to have a glut of them in our market, and unfortunately a lack of family-style housing. For whatever reason, in 2012 they changed the zoning. I don't agree with what they did. I don't think it fits with the character and form of the neighborhood as a single residential neighborhood, predominantly, other than the Blue Waters, which in itself is different because it's set back quite far, has greenery. So I feel for the neighbors and their concerns they have. I live not far from that area, and it's troublesome for me. I took a look at it the other day, and I stepped back across the street at Tillista Park, and I try to envision that building, your proposal, the house next to it, which has the same zoning, and the Blue Waters, although strata, has the same zoning. And I thought, if that all goes that way, wow, that's a big massing and a lot of building, and really out of line with that neighborhood. And I also can't help but think that, and it's something that in 2012 they couldn't have given thought to at the time, flood construction level. So it's a 4-story building, but it isn't a 4-story building. With the extra grade you have to build and the rooftop structure, it's essentially a 5.5 story building. So that also adds to the concerns of the neighbors, and I echo their concerns. Having said that, I will support the recommendation because you're completely within your rights, and you've done the best you can within what you're allowed to do. I think that something for us as a council we have to look to in the future with the flood construction level and what we look at in terms of stories and heights. And it's still a problem for me, but I will support it just because, as I said, you've done everything you can to be within the rules, so I have to support that. Thank you.
Thank you. Does committee have any further questions or comments for the proponent? Yes, Committee Member Smith.
If we could go, Mr. Gillespie, to, I forget which elevation drawing it is, the one that shows clearly the tiering of the retaining wall, which is a significant, that would.
Or I have this one with the existing hedging, or I can show with removal of
the one
neighbors.
without the hedging. Yeah, I guess that would be. So my question is what? So there is a ledge now, part way up the retaining wall, and we understand that the second level of the retaining wall is set back. My question is how far is the setback of the upper part of the retaining wall? And the reason I ask for that is, how substantial is that screening going to be? Is it going to be shrubbery, this thick, or is it going to be 3 feet? And my second question is how high? My understanding of my calculation from the first drawing, I may have actually asked the question at that presentation, but on the northwest corner, I believe the retaining wall was over 10 feet high. So is that shrubbery going to be as if it grows to where the fence is that 3 feet, 4 feet? So the depth and the height.
Mr. Mayor, thank you for that. I'll answer the question about the where we're at with the height of the retaining walls, and then I'll pass it to Mr. Grant to answer the shrubbery specific questions. If I may, you're correct. The grade difference between the 4.8 FCL and 1.5 existing grade was 3.3 meters, about 10 feet. So what we did is split that difference. So now the highest point of the retaining wall on the property is this corner here at 1.65 meters, and then this height here is another 1.65 meters. So we've split the difference at its highest point, and then at its lowest point, the top retaining wall will still be 1.65, and the lowest point will be the difference. I believe it was about 20 centimeters, if I'm not mistaken. To answer your question about how far set back, it's just shy of a meter. It's about 80 centimeters set back, enough for some planting. And if that answers your question about the setback, I'll hand it over to Mr. Grant to walk us through the type of material and what we can expect that to grow to.
So I do have another question about the shrubbery. Is from what it will be proposed to be planted in that setback, how long would it take to grow to what we see now? Because we see, you know, landscaping that, you know, that takes a long time to get to what the rendering shows.
Yes, fair enough. Very good question.
I can answer that.
Keith, thank you.
Yeah, Keith Grant, landscape architect. The plant material proposed for the planting areas would be hardy, adaptive, or native plant material. Typically, a evergreen and deciduous material, so it'd be Oregon grape is the evergreen material, and then a combination of snow barrier or Nootka rose for the deciduous material. Just as an example, typical sizes that you buy, like a number 3 pot of Oregon grape, is going to be around 2 feet in height, and it would grow. They are quick growers, so within a couple of years, it is going to reach the sort of the upper limits of that the wall. The deciduous material would grow, I think, even quicker than that. So we are looking at a little bit of a lapse in growth time. The only alternative to that is try to get something larger, and sometimes that can be a real challenge in the market right now, just because of availability.
Thank you for that. Any further questions? Then I will say thank you very much for your presentation and for the changes you have made. And thank you for this evening. So committee?
Thank you, Chair.
Yep. Committee
Sorry.
member.
Sorry, I did have one more question, and that's the rooftop green wall. Can you describe that a little bit more, please?
Right. So we wanted to be rather strategic with how we dealt with that massing. Typically, the more you do, the more attention you draw to it. So we wanted to be careful with the materiality we used. So this would be a green wall, some additional planting that we could use either through a lattice structure or something that would basically help screen some of that wall and break up some of the massing. Keith, did you have anything to add to that?
Typically, it's put up cables, and you have to have a significant soil resource at the base, obviously, and irrigation to just promote the growth of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, committee, you've got a recommendation in front of you. What is your pleasure?
I'll move the recommendation that following the receipt of revised drawings as per Council Resolution 2019.36.475, owners and tenants in occupational property within 75 meters, 246 feet of the properties at 9570 and 9574 5th Street be notified of development variance permit application number DV 100286 to relax the setback requirements for retaining walls taller than 1.2 meters, be notified regarding the proposed variances, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance, and that if council authorizes the issuance of development variance application number DV 100286, then development permit application number DP 100796 to permit the construction of a 16-unit condo building be brought before council for consideration of approval with the following conditions. A, that the property owner shall, prior to the issuance of building permit, pay to the town a deposit in the amount of 115% of the estimated cost to complete the hard and soft landscaping for the development. B, that the owner shall, prior to the issuance of building permit, register a flood hazard covenant on the title of the property referencing the submitted engineer's report, and C, that the property owner shall, prior to the issuance of building permit, register a restrictive covenant on the title of the property with the town as a signatory, prohibiting the future strata council from passing any bylaws that may restrict occupancy of the building based on age.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? Then I'll call the question. All in favor? Oh, sorry. Yes.
So I do want to thank the proponent. The proponent took a number of points from committee's first discussion of this proposal, and I think they are substantial changes for the betterment. That is the tiering of the retaining wall and the replacement of what the screening will be. Not only the articulation to the west wall, but also change in building materials, which gives it a different appearance. And by calculation, it seems to be a significant reduction of the rooftop structure, such that it will be won't be seen for a much further distance than originally envisioned. And for additionally making fairly quickly the two changes that the Advisory Planning Commission recommended for us to see this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Committee Member Duncan?
Yeah, thank you. I guess just relating to the fact that, once again, we will be inviting letters and comments, and I suspect the same people will be sending similar letters to the ones they've already sent, which are all very well worded. And I've been looking for it so that I could read from it, that they're making the argument that this building, while they have done a really great job fulfilling the letter of the zoning bylaw and the OCP, because of the flood construction level, may violate the spirit of it, because nobody could have foreseen us having to have flood construction level at the time they made this zoning amendment to allow 4 stories, and so now it's effectively like we're allowing 5. And while this is true, we're still going forward with this, but that it will be something that we'll have to bring forward in our discussions as council later as to how having FCL requirements in neighborhoods is going to affect it, because it affects not just this property, but every property in that area that's within there. And it's going to affect the price if they expect us to try and stop developments going in of what that land can be sold for and what their houses would then be sold for. And so this neighborhood needs to understand that is going to be a tricky thing for us to talk about, and that we'll have to talk about with them, but that for this development, this is the fairest solution, not just for the developer, but probably for them and the rest of the neighborhood as well.
Thank you. Committee Member Wainwright?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate my colleague bringing this point up, because I have been giving quite a bit of thought to flood construction level and so on, and one of the things that we have to appreciate is it applies to everybody. That is, even if you've got a single family house in the neighborhood, you obviously would like to be above the flood construction level. So, potentially we could say, okay, here we are making a 5-story building when we really only wanted 4 because of the flood construction level. Let's make the total height, height minus flood construction level. But think about being fair when you do that. So when the single family home is doing a big renovation and it triggers, now you have to comply with the flood construction level, because it will, or the house catches fire and has to be rebuilt, we're going to say to them, well, you used to have a 2-story house, but now it's 2 stories minus flood construction level. And unless we're prepared to do that, consistently, I think we really can't just target the multifamily. I suppose we could, but it's not fair. So I'd simply point that out, that we really should as we struggle with figuring out how to do this, try to be fair.
Thank you for those comments. Any more discussion? Then I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And do we have a motion to go for adjournment?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.